The desert air hung still that morning, carrying only the whisper of sand against ancient stone. In a remote corner of the Near East, where the earth holds secrets older than memory, a team of archaeologists bent over a section of excavated clay. Their brushes moved with practiced precision, sweeping away millennia of dust. Then someone stopped. In the hardened sediment, preserved with impossible clarity, were the unmistakable impressions of tiny paws. 9,500 years had passed since something small walked across that wet clay. The prints measured barely 2 inches across, 4 toes on each foot. The delicate signature of a creature that weighed perhaps 8 pounds. The team photographed the prints from every angle, measured them, catalogued them. But as the sun climbed higher and the shadows shortened, a question settled over the dig site like evening chill. What was a cat doing here, in a human settlement, thousands of years before anyone thought domestication had even begun? We're told the story of domestication as if it is simple. Humans chose certain animals, docile ones, useful ones, and bent them to our will over countless generations. With dogs, the narrative fits. We can trace their evolution from wolves, see the gradual changes in skull shape and temperament, follow the breadcrumb trail of bones through archaeological sites in a clear progression. The story has a beginning, a middle, and an end that makes sense. But cats. Cats appear in the human world like ghosts materializing in doorways. One moment they're wild, solitary hunters in the scrublands and forests, keeping to themselves for millions of years. The next moment they're in our grain stores, in our homes, in our temples and tombs. There is no gradual transition, no slow warming to human presence. They simply show up, as if they'd made a decision we weren't consulted about. The research team stood in the fading light, staring at those paw prints, and felt the weight of something larger than their individual discovery. Across the world, in dozens of dig sites, the same pattern repeats. Cats arrive in human settlements not as captives or curiosities, but as if they belong there, as if they'd always belonged there. And once they arrived, they never left. They left no temples, wrote no texts, commanded no armies, yet they conquered the world twice. How did creatures weighing less than 10 pounds reshape human history more effectively than most emperors? The question sounds absurd until you look at the evidence, until you see how civilizations rose and fell on the backs of grain storage and what lived in those grain stores. Until you understand that the word catastrophe shares its root with cat, and perhaps that etymology isn't accidental. This isn't a story about pets. The word itself diminishes what actually happened, wraps it in sentiment and triviality. This is an investigation into one of history's strangest partnerships. A relationship that began in the shadows of the Fertile Crescent and ended up determining which human societies survived and which collapsed into dust. A relationship that happened not once but twice, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, following almost identical patterns. The scientists packed their equipment as darkness claimed the desert. Those paw prints would be preserved, studied, added to journals and databases. But the real mystery wouldn't be solved in laboratories. It would require going back past the prints and pottery shards, past the rise of cities and the birth of agriculture, to a world that stood on the edge of transformation. To understand how cats took over the world twice, we must first understand what that world looked like before they entered it. A world where humans were about to make a choice, or have a choice made for them, that would echo through every century that followed. 12,000 years ago, humans made a decision that changed everything. For hundreds of thousands of years, we had moved with the seasons, following herds and harvests, carrying everything we owned on our backs. Then, in a handful of river valleys across the Near East, we stopped moving. We planted seeds in deliberate rows. We waited for them to grow. We built structures meant to last not months but generations. For the first time in human history, we stayed. The Neolithic Revolution sounds grand in textbooks, but on the ground it meant something simpler and stranger. Humans were learning to live in one place. Nomadic tribes became villages. Temporary shelters became houses with foundations. Most importantly, for the first time, humans accumulated surplus. We harvested more grain than we could eat immediately, stored it in clay vessels and underground silos, and planned for winter. We had finally learned to control our food supply. But control is an illusion that reveals itself slowly. Within months of the first successful harvests, the problems began. Stored grain created something that had never existed before in human experience: a concentrated, reliable food source that didn't move. And in nature, nothing goes unnoticed. The rats came first, then the mice, then every rodent species within traveling distance, drawn by the overwhelming scent of accessible calories. They arrived in numbers that defied comprehension. Archaeological excavations of early Neolithic settlements reveal rodent bones in layers so thick they suggest populations in the thousands per site. The gnaw marks on storage vessels tell their own story: systematic destruction, night after night, season after season. Imagine the sound in those early villages after dark, the scratching inside walls, the scrabbling of claws on clay, the incessant gnawing that never stopped. Imagine waking to find a winter's worth of grain reduced to husks and droppings. Imagine children going hungry because the stores you worked all season to fill were consumed by creatures you couldn't stop. This wasn't a minor inconvenience. Some settlements were abandoned entirely, their inhabitants driven out not by drought or warfare but by rodents. The archaeological record shows ghost towns from this period, grain stores violated, dwellings intact but empty. These early farmers faced an impossible equation. Agriculture required staying in one place, but staying in one place meant feeding an army of vermin that multiplied faster than any human effort could eliminate them. Humans had survived for hundreds of thousands of years without agriculture. We knew how to hunt, how to gather, how to move with the land rather than against it. When the rodent crisis reached its peak, the obvious solution was abandonment. Return to the old ways. Go back to a life that worked. Yet most settlements didn't empty. Most farmers didn't leave. They stayed, and in staying, they waited. We're told they were stubborn, committed to progress, unwilling to surrender the advantages of settled life. But perhaps they sensed something we can only see in retrospect. Perhaps they knew, on some unconscious level, that the solution was already present, that they weren't alone in watching those grain stores. That something else had noticed the sudden abundance of prey, something that had been hunting rodents for millions of years with far more efficiency than any human trap. Humans had finally learned to control their food supply, but in doing so, they attracted an enemy that multiplied faster than they could kill. They needed a solution. They got something else entirely, a partnership that would come with unexpected terms in the darkness beyond the firelight. In the spaces between buildings where humans didn't venture, small shadows moved with purpose. They had been watching, waiting, calculating. The rodent feast had drawn them from the wild lands into human territory, and once they arrived, everything changed. They had been watching long before humans noticed them. Small shapes moving through tall grass at twilight, eyes catching the last rays of sun before darkness fell completely. The African wildcat, Felis sylvestris libica, had existed for millions of years as a solitary hunter in the scrublands and light forests of the Near East. They weighed between 8 and 12 pounds. They hunted alone. They defended territories that overlapped only during brief mating seasons. They were, by every measure, the perfect rodent-killing machine evolution had ever produced. A single wildcat could catch and kill multiple rodents per day. Their hearing detected frequencies far beyond human range, allowing them to track prey moving beneath grain stores. Their flexible spines let them twist mid-leap, adjusting to a fleeing mouse's desperate zigzag. Their retractable claws stayed sharp through constant use. They hunted primarily at dawn and dusk, the exact times when rodent activity peaked in human settlements. Everything about their biology aligned with the ecological niche humans had accidentally created. Around 10,000 years ago, these cats began appearing at the edges of human villages. Archaeological sites across Cyprus, the Levant, and the Fertile Crescent reveal their bones mixed with human refuse, their paw prints in clay, their presence woven into the everyday texture of early agricultural life. But here is what makes no sense. There is no evidence humans invited them. No ancient breeding programs. No training regimens. No artifacts showing cats in cages or on leashes. No texts describing how to catch or control them. Every other domesticated animal bent to human will through breeding, training, and control. Cats did none of this. They simply arrived, killed what needed killing, and stayed on their own terms. Why did humans accept this arrangement? And why does it matter? Consider the alternative. Humans had domesticated wolves into dogs through deliberate selection, choosing the most docile pups over generations, creating animals that looked to humans for leadership and approval. Dogs fit into human hierarchies because dogs evolved from pack animals that already understood hierarchies. The transition made sense, but cats were nothing like dogs. They didn't form packs. They didn't have alpha behaviors that humans could exploit. They didn't look to anyone for approval. They were territorial, solitary hunters who had spent millions of years perfecting independence. By every measure, they should have been impossible to domesticate using traditional methods. Yet they domesticated themselves. This wasn't a metaphor or poetic exaggeration. The genetic and archaeological evidence points to self-domestication. The wildcats that thrived near human settlements were those with slightly lower fear responses, those willing to hunt within earshot of human activity, those that could tolerate the proximity of other cats in prey-rich environments. Over generations, natural selection favored these traits without any deliberate human intervention. The cats that adapted to human presence reproduced more successfully than those that remained in the wilderness. They changed themselves to fit into human spaces while maintaining everything that made them cats. This created a relationship unlike anything else in the human-animal world. Dogs served, cattle were property, sheep followed, but cats operated as independent contractors, providing services while demanding nothing but the freedom to leave whenever they chose. And humans accepted this. Why? Because the alternative was starvation. The rodent problem was too severe to refuse any solution, even one that came with strange terms. The partnership began in the settlements scattered across the Fertile Crescent, where humans first learned to farm and cats first learned to exploit human farming. It started small and local, a handful of wildcats in a handful of villages. But from this specific region, over the next several thousand years, cats would begin their first conquest of the world. To understand how they achieved this, we must first understand the civilization that would carry them across continents and make them indispensable to human survival. Something changed in Egypt around 3000 BCE. In tomb paintings from earlier dynasties, cats appear occasionally small and peripheral, hunters in the marshes, glimpsed in the backgrounds of daily life scenes. But as centuries passed, they moved toward the center of the frame. They grew larger in the artwork, more detailed, more present. By the height of the Old Kingdom, cats weren't just depicted, they were venerated. They appeared on temple walls with the same reverence given to pharaohs. They sat at the feet of nobles in death as they had in life. Something had shifted in the Egyptian consciousness, and that shift would echo across millennia. The transformation crystallized in the goddess Bastet. Originally, she appeared as a fierce lioness, a deity of warfare and royal protection, but over centuries her image changed. The lioness softened into a domestic cat, and her domains expanded. Protection, yes, but also fertility, joy, music, and the sanctity of the home. Temples rose in her honor. The city of Bubastis became her cult center, a place where pilgrims traveled from across Egypt to worship at her shrine. Archaeological excavations at Bubastis revealed something staggering. Beneath the temple complex, researchers discovered catacombs containing hundreds of thousands of mummified cats. Not hundreds, not thousands. Hundreds of thousands carefully wrapped in linen, placed in bronze coffins, buried with the same rituals afforded to human dead. Some were kittens. Some were ancient, their bones showing years of life in comfort. Each represented an offering to the goddess, but also something deeper, a recognition that these creatures held power beyond the physical. The scale suggests obsession. Killing a cat, even accidentally, carried the death penalty under Egyptian law. Ancient historians recorded incidents of mobs forming to execute those accused of harming cats, regardless of intent or circumstance. Families would shave their eyebrows when a household cat died, entering formal mourning as they would for human relatives. This wasn't tea sentiment. It was something else entirely. Egypt's prosperity lived and died on grain. The Nile flooded annually, depositing rich soil that produced harvests feeding millions. But that grain had to be stored through seasons of drought and uncertainty. Without effective storage, Egyptian civilization would have collapsed within a generation. Cats protected those stores with ruthless efficiency. A single cat could eliminate dozens of rodents per week. Multiply that across thousands of cats in thousands of granaries, and the economic impact becomes clear. Cats weren't just useful. They were the difference between survival and starvation. But Egypt's obsession went deeper than economics. Cats embodied qualities that resonated with Egyptian cosmology in ways no other animal could match. They moved between light and darkness, active at twilight when the boundaries between worlds grew thin. They saw in near total darkness, perceiving things invisible to human eyes. They were creatures of thresholds, of transitions, of mysteries humans couldn't penetrate. In a culture obsessed with the afterlife and the hidden nature of reality, cats seemed to possess knowledge humans could only glimpse. The Egyptians understood something the rest of the world hadn't yet discovered. Cats were valuable beyond measure, so they did what any empire does with valuable resources: they restricted access. Egyptian law prohibited the export of cats, treating them as sacred national treasures that could not leave the kingdom's borders. Foreign merchants could buy grain, papyrus, gold, but not cats. This wasn't just religious protection, it was strategic control. Egypt maintained a monopoly on the most effective pest control technology in the ancient world. The Egyptians worshipped cats as gods, mummified them by the hundreds of thousands, and made killing one a crime punishable by death. They knew something the rest of the world hadn't yet discovered. And when that secret escaped Egypt's borders, it changed everything. But here is the question that should trouble anyone who looks closely at the timeline. If Egypt guarded its cats so carefully, how did these animals spread across the Mediterranean world? How did creatures that were illegal to export end up in Greek cities, Roman villas, and eventually every corner of 3 continents? The answer involves Phoenician traders who valued profit over law, Greek merchants willing to risk Egyptian punishment, and Roman conquerors who took what they wanted. But it also involves something more fundamental about cats themselves: their nature, their adaptability, and their uncanny ability to go wherever they chose, regardless of human laws or borders. The ancient Mediterranean was a web of routes connecting civilizations. Phoenician vessels with purple, dyed sails moved between Tyre and Carthage. Greek merchant ships carried olive oil and wine from island to island. Egyptian grain barges sailed northward, their holds packed with harvests that would feed distant cities. These ships carried more than trade goods, they carried ecosystems, and within those ecosystems a problem that threatened every voyage. Rodents infested ancient ships with the same enthusiasm they showed for grain stores on land. Archaeological excavations of shipwrecks from the Bronze Age and Iron Age reveal rodent bones in cargo holds, gnaw marks on wooden beams, and evidence of catastrophic food loss during voyages. A journey that should have taken weeks could end in starvation if rats consumed provisions faster than humans could eat them. Sailors tried everything: traps, poisons, cats carved in protective amulets. Nothing worked with any consistency, except actual cats. How the first cats left Egypt remains murky, lost in the gaps between official history and practical reality. Egyptian law forbade their export, but laws only work when people follow them. A Phoenician trader loading grain in Alexandria might have noticed a small shape slipping between cargo containers. Perhaps he looked away deliberately. Perhaps he recognized opportunity when he saw it. Cats were compact, self-sufficient, and could solve a problem that cost merchants fortunes in spoiled goods. The choice between following Egyptian law and protecting one's livelihood wasn't complicated. Other cats needed no human conspiracy. They were, after all, animals that had domesticated themselves by following food sources. Ships represented concentrated prey in contained spaces, rodent hunting made easy. A cat watching a grain vessel being loaded would have smelled the rats before the ship left port. Slipping aboard required only opportunity and nerve. By the time sailors discovered a stowaway, they were miles from shore with a useful hunter already at work in the hold. Between 2000 and 500 BCE, cats spread across the Mediterranean basin like a secret being whispered from port to port. Archaeological evidence traces their expansion. Cat bones appear in ancient Greek settlements around 1200 BCE, in Phoenician colonies across North Africa, in Etruscan sites in Italy. Each discovery pushes the timeline of cat presence further, suggesting movements we haven't yet documented. They followed trade routes with the same efficiency they hunted prey. Greek playwright Aristophanes mentioned cats around 425 BCE, treating them as familiar enough to reference without explanation. By then, cats had ceased being exotic Egyptian curiosities and become common sights in Greek cities. Roman writers showed similar familiarity. Pliny the Elder, cataloguing the natural world in the 1st century CE, described cats with the tone of someone discussing livestock, useful animals that served specific purposes. Archaeological excavations at Roman sites across Europe reveal cat remains from Londinium to Pompeii, from Germania to Gaul. Roman legions carried cats with them as they conquered territories, practical measures against rodent infestations in military grain supplies. When Roman soldiers built fortresses in Britain, cats came with them. When they established colonies in Iberia, cats followed. The expansion wasn't systematic or planned, but it was inexorable. Wherever humans stored grain, cats appeared. But something crucial changed as cats spread beyond Egypt. Outside the Nile Valley, no one worshipped them. They weren't tea gods or sacred beings. They were workers, tools, property. Greeks valued them for rodent control, but nothing more. Romans kept them for practical purposes, showing neither reverence nor particular affection. The mystical status they held in Egypt evaporated as they became common across the ancient world. Cats left Egypt hidden in grain ships and merchant vessels, spreading across the ancient world like a secret being whispered from port to port. They became common, useful, ordinary, and that ordinariness would nearly kill them all. By the early medieval period, cats had established themselves throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. They lived in European cities, North African ports, Asian trading posts. They had successfully completed their first conquest of the known world, transitioning from wild African hunters to ubiquitous human companions in less than 8,000 years. By any measure, it represented an extraordinary expansion, one of the most successful mammalian range extensions in history. But this very success planted seeds of catastrophe. Cats had spread so widely, become so familiar, that humans stopped seeing them as remarkable. They were simply there, part of the background of daily life. And when the world changed again, when fear and superstition gripped Europe like a plague, cats would find themselves cast as villains in humanity's darkest chapters. Their ordinariness would offer no protection. Their usefulness would be forgotten, and the species that had conquered the ancient world would face extinction at the hands of the very civilization they had helped build. When Rome fell, it didn't fall all at once. The empire fractured slowly, piece by piece, over centuries. Roads crumbled, aqueducts dried. Cities that once held hundreds of thousands dwindled to thousands, then hundreds. And in this collapse, many things were lost. Technologies, philosophies, entire libraries burned or rotted into dust. Among the losses, less documented but no less significant, was something simpler: the careful maintenance of working relationships between humans and the animals that kept them alive. The written record of cats becomes strangely sparse during Europe's early medieval period, roughly 500 to 1000 CE. Archaeological evidence confirms their presence: bones in settlements, paw prints in medieval pottery, but they vanished from the cultural narrative in ways that should trouble anyone paying attention. In Roman texts, cats appear regularly, discussed with the casual familiarity afforded to useful creatures. In early medieval texts, they barely mentioned. When they do appear, it is in margins, in footnotes, in spaces between more important subjects. Christianity's rise changed how Europeans thought about animals. The new religion came with hierarchies and categories, with clean and unclean, sacred and profane. Animals that served under human dominion, cattle, sheep, horses, fit neatly into the biblical framework. They were Adam's to name, Noah's to save, humanity's to rule. But cats didn't serve. They cooperated on their own terms, came and went as they pleased, answered to no one. This independence made them symbolically problematic for a religion built on obedience, submission, and proper order. Worse, cats carried associations that made them actively suspicious. They had been Egyptian gods. They appeared in pagan rituals and pre-Christian religious art. They moved at night, saw in darkness, inhabited liminal spaces between human settlements and wild lands. Everything about them suggested boundaries crossed, rules ignored, hierarchy inverted. In a culture increasingly obsessed with proper Christian order, cats represented something fundamentally unmanageable. Medieval Europe's economic structure didn't help. Feudalism organized itself around cattle and sheep, around animals that could be owned, controlled, and assigned value. A cow represented wealth. You could measure, A cat represented nothing but itself. Agricultural systems focused on grain, yes, but also on animals that grazed common lands and could be taxed, tithed, and counted. Independent predators hunting mice in barns didn't fit into the accounting systems that structured medieval life. So cats became liminal creatures, present but not celebrated, useful but not valued. Increasingly, they appeared in association with women living outside patriarchal control. Widows, midwives, healers, anyone occupying social margins. Medieval texts that mentioned cats often linked them to witchcraft, to darkness, to forces that operated outside sanctioned power structures. This wasn't universal. Some households still kept cats. Some monasteries still valued them, but the cultural tide had shifted. Cats were being written out of the positive human story, relegated to shadows, and in those shadows something else was multiplying. Medieval European cities were dense, filthy, and teeming with rodents. Archaeological excavations reveal rat bones in every layer of medieval urban sites, in quantities suggesting populations measured in millions across Europe. Ships moved between ports carrying grain and trade goods, but also carrying rats that spread disease and consumed supplies. Granaries, homes, churches, and castles all hosted thriving rodent populations. Some contemporary accounts describe rats so numerous they moved through streets in visible waves. Cats could have controlled this. A healthy cat population would have limited rodent numbers the way they had in ancient Egypt and Rome. But Europe had forgotten why cats mattered. They were killed when found near churches, ignored when they tried to establish territories near granaries associated with evil rather than protection. The ecological balance that had sustained civilizations for thousands of years was breaking down, and no one seemed to notice. For hundreds of years, Europe forgot why cats mattered. Rodents multiplied, ships sailed, trade flourished, and then, in 1347, something arrived on those ships that would kill 50 million people and make humanity remember. The Black Death came from the east, carried by merchant vessels that docked in Sicilian ports after long voyages from Crimean trading posts. The disease moved through flea, bitten rats, which moved through ships and cities with nothing to stop them. Between 1347 and 1353, it would kill between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's entire population. Some cities lost 70% of their inhabitants. Some villages were erased completely. To understand cats' second conquest of the world, we must first understand this catastrophe, how it unfolded, how it devastated a continent, and how humanity's treatment of cats made it far worse than it needed to be. Because when the plague finally receded, Europe would emerge changed forever. And in that changed world, cats would return with a vengeance. October 1347, 12 Genoese trading ships limped into the harbour at Messina, Sicily, after a desperate voyage from Crimean ports. The crews that staggered onto the docks were dying. Black swellings bulged from their necks, armpits, and groins, buboes that gave the plague its name. Blood seeped through their skin in dark patches. Some coughed crimson spray. Most were already delirious with fever. Messina's port authorities tried to quarantine the ships, but it was too late. The disease moved faster than human comprehension. Within days, people who never approached the docks were collapsing with the same symptoms. Within weeks, thousands were dead, but the ships hadn't carried only dying men. In the holds below deck, hidden in the cargo, another passenger had made the journey. Black rats, Rattus rattus, had travelled from Central Asian trade posts through Middle Eastern markets to Mediterranean ports, breeding continuously in the warm darkness of ship holds. These rats carried fleas, and these fleas carried Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that would kill between 75 and 200 million people worldwide. Medieval ships were perfect plague incubators. Grain shipments provided food. Dark holds provided shelter. The constant motion of maritime trade ensured continuous rat migration from port to port, ship to ship, continent to continent. A rat might board a vessel in Constantinople, breed during the voyage, and its offspring would scatter into a new city when cargo was unloaded. The fleas moved with them, biting rats first, but not exclusively. When rats died, the fleas sought new hosts, human hosts. The progression was elegant in its horror. Fleas carrying plague bacteria bit humans, injecting the pathogen directly into the bloodstream. The bacteria multiplied in lymph nodes, creating the characteristic buboes. Fever spiked. Blood poisoning spread. Some victims developed pneumonic plague, coughing the disease directly into the air, making person-to-person transmission possible without flea intermediaries. Medieval doctors had no framework to understand what was happening. They blamed bad air, planetary alignments, divine punishment, anything except the real vector moving through their streets on four legs. But here is what the mortality records show. When examined carefully, the devastation wasn't T-uniform. Some regions lost 80% of their population, others lost 30%. The variations weren't T-random. Cities with documented cat populations, certain Italian city-states, parts of Islamic Iberia, regions of the Byzantine Empire, experienced measurably lower death rates than comparable cities where cats had been eliminated or marginalized. The correlation isn't T-perfect. Other factors influenced mortality, population density, trade volume, sanitation, climate, but the pattern holds across enough regions to suggest something real. In Cairo, where Islamic tradition encouraged cat protection, plague struck but didn't devastate to the same degree it did in northern European cities. In Venice, which maintained working relationships with cats for port rodent control, mortality remained lower than inland regions. The evidence is definitive, but it is haunting. The ecological cascade was simple. Fewer cats meant more rats. Medieval Europe's cat marginalization had allowed rat populations to explode unchecked. More rats meant more fleas. More fleas meant more plague transmission opportunities. The bacteria moved through this expanded rodent network like fire through dry grass. Every additional rat represented potential disease transmission. Every missing cat represented hundreds of rats that would have been killed but weren't. Contemporary accounts describe the catastrophe in terms that still chill. Bodies piling in streets because no one remained to bury them. Mass graves dug outside city walls filled with thousands of corpses stacked in layers. Entire villages abandoned when everyone died or fled, parents abandoning sick children. Churches so full of corpses that services stopped. The smell of death hanging over cities for months. Some chroniclers wrote that the living barely outnumbered the dead. Some stopped writing entirely, their manuscripts ending mid-sentence as the authors succumbed. Could this have been prevented? No. The bacterium existed. Trade routes connected continents, and medieval medicine lacked antibiotics. But could it have been reduced, slowed, made less catastrophic? If European cities had maintained healthy cat populations, would fewer rats have meant fewer transmission opportunities? If cats had been valued rather than marginalized, protected rather than killed, would 50 million people still have died? The question isn't answerable with certainty. History doesn't offer controlled experiments. We can't rerun the 14th century with different cat populations and measure the results. But the comparative evidence suggests a possibility that should have terrified survivors. Humanity had marginalized the one animal capable of controlling the primary plague vector. They had broken an ecological relationship that had protected civilizations for thousands of years. And the price for that mistake was measured in tens of millions of corpses. The Black Death killed 50 million Europeans in 5 years. In regions where cats were valued and protected, death rates were measurably lower. Europe had marginalized the one animal that could have slowed the catastrophe. They would not make that mistake again. As plague devastated the continent, a desperate recognition began spreading among survivors. This wasn't theological, it wasn't sentimental, it was practical and existential. Rats carried death, cats killed rats. The equation was simple enough that even medieval minds gripped by apocalyptic terror could understand it. The question became urgent. Could cat populations recover quickly enough to help humanity survive what came next? Survival changes minds faster than philosophy. As the plague ravaged Europe throughout the 1350s and 1360s, returning in waves that killed with unpredictable fury, people began noticing patterns. Certain households seemed less affected. Certain families lost fewer members. The correlation was perfect. Plague killed randomly, mercilessly, without clear logic. But over time, through thousands of individual observations, a pattern emerged. Houses with cats fared better. It wasn't mystical protection. It was mathematics. Homes with cats had fewer rats. Fewer rats meant fewer fleas. Fewer fleas meant lower probability of infection. The mechanism wasn't understood in epidemiological terms. Germ theory would emerge for another 5 centuries, but the practical observation was undeniable. People who owned cats had better survival odds, and in a world where half your neighbors might die screaming in agony, any advantage mattered. The shift started locally, spreading through communities the same way plague had, through observation and desperate communication. A merchant in Florence noticed his warehouse stayed relatively rat-free while his competitor swarmed with them. A monastery in France began breeding cats deliberately, documenting increased grain security in their ledgers. A ship's captain who always kept cats aboard survived multiple plague-exposed voyages while other vessels returned with decimated crews or didn't return at all. Medieval records that survive from the post-plague period show this transformation. Monastic account books from the late 14th and early 15th centuries suddenly include line items for cat acquisition and care where none existed before. Merchant guild documents discuss strategies for obtaining cats, sometimes paying significant sums for breeding pairs. Legal records show shifts too. Fewer accusations of witchcraft, specifically targeting cat owners, more ordinances protecting cats in granary districts. The change appeared in culture as well. After 1400, cats began appearing in European art and literature in notably different roles. They still carried some negative associations, but positive depictions increased. Cats as household protectors, as symbols of domestic security, as practical companions. Illuminated manuscripts showed cats in domestic scenes without sinister undertones. Woodcuts depicted cats alongside merchants and craftsmen. The cultural rehabilitation had begun, but this wasn't a simple redemption story. Europe's relationship with cats remained complicated, contradictory, and often violent. The witch trials that would intensify in the 16th and 17th centuries would see thousands of cats killed alongside accused witches. Superstition didn't vanish just because practicality demanded cat protection. The two impulses, fear and necessity, existed simultaneously, creating tensions that played out in legal systems, religious doctrine, and daily practice. What had changed was that practical necessity now competed with superstition in ways it hadn't before plague. A merchant might fear cats as demonic but fear rats destroying his inventory more. A city official might harbor religious suspicions about cats but recognize that granaries without cats meant starvation. The cost-benefit calculation had shifted. Cats had proven their value in the most brutal way possible by their absence during catastrophe. After losing 50 million people, Europe finally learned what Egypt had known 3,000 years earlier. Cats weren't optional, they were infrastructure, and this time, cats would spread to every inhabited continent on Earth. Ships' captains began requiring cats aboard as standard practice. Maritime insurance, beginning to develop in Italian city-states, sometimes mandated cats on grain vessels. Granaries hired cat keepers, positions with actual wages and responsibilities. Some cities passed ordinances protecting cats in specific districts, making their injury or killing subject to fines. These weren't sweeping cultural changes, but accumulations of practical decisions by people who learned hard lessons about ecological relationships. Cat populations recovered slowly throughout the 15th century. Breeding programs emerged, some formal, most informal. Households deliberately maintaining breeding pairs, ensuring kittens were distributed to neighbors, ships, and businesses that needed them. Cats spread through trade networks more extensively than ever before, but this time the distribution was active rather than passive. Humans weren't just tolerating cats or allowing them to self-domesticate. They were seeking them out, protecting them, ensuring their propagation. The genetic evidence tells this story clearly. Analysis of European cat populations shows a genetic bottleneck followed by rapid expansion during the 14th and 15th centuries. The plague had reduced cat numbers through direct killing, through environmental collapse, through the same chaos that killed humans. But the recovery was faster than natural repopulation would suggest, indicating deliberate human intervention in cat breeding and distribution. By 1500, cats had reconquered Europe. They lived in every major city, sailed on most commercial vessels, worked in granaries from Lisbon to Moscow. They completed their return from marginalization to necessity. But Europe itself was about to transform. The age of exploration was beginning. Portuguese vessels were pushing down the African coast. Spanish ships were preparing to cross the Atlantic. European powers were about to project themselves across every ocean, colonizing every habitable continent. And wherever those ships went, cats would go with them. This time, there would be no stopping their spread. Evolution is always slow, under normal conditions. Yes, species change gradually over millions of years through tiny mutations and selective pressures, so subtle they are nearly invisible. But when conditions become extreme, when populations crash and recover from small founding groups, when survival depends on specific traits, evolution accelerates. Changes that might take 100,000 years can happen in 100 generations. And in the chaos of plague-era Europe, something happened to cats that we only now beginning to understand. Recent genetic research into domestic cat populations has revealed something unexpected. Scientists analyzing DNA from cats across Europe noticed patterns that didn't match predictions. They found genetic bottlenecks, points where populations crashed dramatically before recovering, occurring precisely in regions most affected by the Black Death. This made sense. Plague killed humans and cats alike. Environmental collapse destroyed both species. But what surprised researchers was what came after the bottleneck. Cats that repopulated post-plague Europe show genetic markers suggesting rapid selection for specific behavioral traits. The changes occurred too quickly and too consistently to be random drift. Something had selected for particular characteristics with unusual intensity. The timeline matched perfectly. Accelerated selection signatures appeared between 1350 and 1500, exactly when cat populations were recovering under desperate human protection. What traits would have mattered most during this period? Cats that stayed closer to human settlements would have had better access to the concentrated rodent populations that humans created. Cats that tolerated human proximity, that didn't flee at every approach, would have been more likely to be deliberately fed, sheltered, and protected by humans who now understood their value. Cats that were exceptionally efficient rodent hunters would have been the most useful, and therefore the most likely to be kept and bred. The selective pressure worked from both directions. Humans were actively choosing cats with these traits, keeping the ones that worked well near homes and granaries, but the environment itself selected too. Cats that couldn't adapt to close human proximity, couldn't access the richest hunting grounds, and had lower survival rates. The result was evolutionary pressure of unusual intensity, operating on multiple levels simultaneously. We can trace this in the genetics. Specific alleles associated with reduced fear response to humans show frequency increases during this period. Genes linked to territoriality and tolerance of other cats, necessary for living in higher densities around human settlements, show selection signatures. Even genes associated with hunting efficiency and prey drive show evidence of selection, though these traits were already strong in wild populations. The cats that survived plague-era Europe weren't just lucky. They were different, changed, and they passed those changes to every cat born after. The Black Death didn't just reshape humanity, it remade the cats themselves. This suggests something profound about the modern human-cat relationship. The domestic cat we know today, the animal that lives contentedly in apartments, tolerates being picked up and handled, yet maintains an air of independence unlike any other domestic animal, may have been significantly shaped by the selective pressures of the plague era. Before the Black Death, cats were already domesticated in the sense that they lived near humans. After, they became domestic in a deeper sense, genetically adapted to thrive in intimate proximity with humanity while retaining their essential catness. Researchers have compared genetic profiles of cats from different lineages. Cats descending from populations that never experienced the European plague bottleneck populations in regions like parts of Asia or Africa that maintained continuous breeding without catastrophic reduction show subtle but measurable behavioral differences. They tend to be more wary of unfamiliar humans, more territorial, less tolerant of the close quarters that characterize modern human-cat households. This doesn't mean plague-era selection domesticated cats in the way humans domesticated dogs. It means the existing domestic relationship intensified and crystallized. The traits that had allowed certain wild cats to self-domesticate 9,000 years earlier Moderate fear responses, hunting drive, territorial flexibility became more pronounced in European lineages. The cats got better at being cats that live with humans. The implications ripple outward. When we pet a cat today, when we feel that peculiar combination of affection and independence in how they respond, we're experiencing something forged in catastrophe. The personality of the modern domestic cat, aloof yet affectionate, independent yet domestic, may have been shaped as much by the Black Death as by the initial domestication in the Fertile Crescent. History didn't just record this transformation, history created it at the genetic level, and these changed cats, more tolerant of humans, better adapted to living alongside us, yet still retaining the independence that makes them cats. We're about to board ships heading to Africa, Asia, the Americas, and Australia. The age of exploration would carry European people, European diseases, European technologies, and European cats to every habitable continent. The second conquest was about to become truly global, and this time, nothing would stop their spread. The wooden ships that carried European ambition across oceans in the 16th century were ecosystems unto themselves. Cramped quarters held crews of dozens or hundreds. Below deck holds packed tight with provisions, barrels of hardtack, sacks of grain, cured meat, dried fruit, everything needed to survive months at sea with no resupply. The ships creaked and groaned through storms, they baked in tropical heat, and within their wooden walls rats bred with abandon. A single breeding pair of rats could produce hundreds of offspring within months. On voyages lasting half a year, the multiplication was exponential. Rats gnawed through water barrels, contaminated food supplies, chewed ropes and wood, spread disease, and made already miserable conditions unbearable. Ships that left port with 6 months of provisions might arrive with 3 months remaining because rats consumed the rest. Crews faced starvation not from poor planning but from stowaways they could eliminate. Ship's cats weren't optional. They were mandatory equipment on virtually every sailing vessel from the 16th century onward. Maritime records show cats listed in official crew manifests. Ship's logs reference them by name. Some naval regulations required captains to maintain cats aboard, treating their absence as a violation comparable to inadequate safety equipment. Cats received rations, recorded in official documents, and their deaths were noted in logs with the same formality as human casualties. Famous ships carried famous cats. Trim, a black and white cat, circumnavigated Australia with Matthew Flinders between 1801 and 1803, earning mentions in Flinders' journals for his hunting prowess and his habit of following the captain like a dog. Mrs. Chippy sailed with Ernest Shackleton's ill-fated endurance expedition to Antarctica. Though the cat didn't survive the ordeal, centuries of maritime history are peppered with cats whose names entered records because sailors valued them enough to document their presence. But the individual stories matter less than the system they represented. Every ship sailing from European ports carried cats, Spanish galleons crossing the Atlantic, Portuguese vessels rounding the Cape of Good Hope, Dutch traders navigating Indonesian archipelagos, British ships colonizing Australia, French explorers charting Pacific islands. Each voyage was a distribution event, spreading cats to places they never naturally reached. The Americas received cats through Spanish, Portuguese, English, and French colonial vessels starting in the early 1500s. Within a century, cat populations had established themselves from Mexico to Argentina, from Caribbean islands to Canadian trading posts. Australia got its first cats with the first fleet in 1788, documented in ships, records as essential pest control for the new colony. Southeast Asian ports that had known cats through ancient trade networks now saw massive population increases through European maritime traffic. Remote Pacific islands received cats through whaling ships and merchant vessels, sometimes deliberately released by captains seeking to establish breeding populations for future voyages. Cats established themselves with remarkable speed. Some ships' cats went ashore during port stops and never returned, finding environments rich with prey and free of European competitors. Settlers deliberately brought breeding pairs to establish populations in new territories. The cats adapted to diverse environments: tropical forests, temperate coastlines, desert interiors, even sub-Antarctic islands. wherever rodents existed, and rodents had spread even more widely than cats. Cats could thrive. Within 300 years, cats went from being primarily a European and North African species to being present on every inhabited continent. The speed and comprehensiveness exceeded anything from the ancient world. Rome took centuries to spread cats around the Mediterranean. European maritime expansion distributed them globally in decades. But while cats solved human problems in these new environments, they were simultaneously becoming invasive species with devastating consequences. Islands that had evolved without mammalian predators suddenly hosted efficient hunters that native birds and small mammals had no defenses against. Ecosystems that had remained stable for millions of years were thrown into chaos. Ground, nesting seabirds disappeared. Small marsupials vanished. Reptile populations crashed. The ecological cost wouldn't be fully understood until the 20th century, but the damage was already occurring. Every ship that sailed carried whiskers and claws. Cats circled the globe more completely than any empire. But while they protected human cargo, they were about to unleash ecological catastrophe on islands and continents that had never known such predators. By 1800, cats were everywhere humans were. They completed their second conquest, this time reaching genuine global saturation. But their relationship with humanity was about to change again, becoming more intimate and complicated than ever before, because cats were about to move from the barns and ships and warehouses into human homes themselves. Something shifted in human consciousness during the 19th century. The change was sudden or universal, but by the end of Queen Victoria's reign, the relationship between humans and cats had transformed in ways that would have bewildered ancient Egyptians and medieval Europeans alike. Cats were becoming something unprecedented, not gods, not workers, but companions. Family members, objects of affection valued for themselves rather than their utility. Multiple forces converged to create this transformation. Urbanization drove millions into cities where traditional farm animals made no sense. You could keep a cow in a London townhouse, but a small carnivore that used a litter box and controlled rodents. That worked. Victorian culture developed an obsession with domesticity, with creating perfect homes as refuges from industrial chaos. Pet keeping became a marker of proper household management, and cats fit this role with increasing prominence. But the real catalyst was the formalization of cat fancy. On the 13th of July 1871, the Crystal Palace in London hosted the first major organized cat show. Harrison Ware, an artist and cat enthusiast, organized the event featuring 160 cats judged on specific criteria. The show was massively popular, attracting thousands of spectators who paid admission to see cats displayed like art. Suddenly, cats weren't just animals. They were breeds, pedigrees, examples of deliberate aesthetic creation. The concept spread rapidly. Cat shows emerged across Britain, then Europe, then America. Breeds were formalized: Persian, Siamese, Angora, British Shorthair. Standards were written. Breeding became systematic. A cat wasn't just a cat anymore. It was a specimen with lineage, with papers, with value determined by conformity to arbitrary standards of beauty. The cultural manifestations appeared everywhere. Victorian art increasingly featured cats as central subjects rather than background details. Paintings showed children cuddling kittens, ladies holding elegant Persians, cats sleeping on cushions in sunlit windows. Literature reflected the shift too. Lewis Carroll's Cheshire Cat, Edward Lear's Illustrated Cats, countless children's books featuring feline protagonists. Cats were being written into culture as sympathetic characters. Most significantly, cats physically moved into homes. Victorian houses had spaces designed specifically for cats: cat doors, cat beds, designated feeding areas. The concept of indoor cats emerged, animals living entirely within human domestic spaces, never working as rodent hunters, but existing purely as companions. This represented a radical departure from thousands of years of human-cat relations built on mutual practical benefit. Class dimensions shaped the transformation initially. Keeping decorative cats was a middle and upper class phenomenon. Working class families still valued cats primarily for utility: the barn cat, the warehouse mouser, the ship's ratter. But within decades, cat ownership democratized. Victorian diaries and letters from all social classes revealed deep emotional attachments to individual cats. Pet cemeteries from the period contain elaborate grave markers for beloved cats, complete with sentimental epitaphs that wouldn't be out of place today. Victorians transformed cats from workers into family members, breeding them for beauty, writing poems about them, mourning them in pet cemeteries. But this intimacy came with a price. Cats became property in ways they'd never been before. The darker implications emerged alongside the sentimentality. Cats became commodified through breeding programs focused on profit rather than welfare. Inbreeding for aesthetic traits created health problems that plague certain breeds today. Victorian scientific culture, obsessed with vivisection and experimental physiology, used cats extensively in brutal experiments. The same culture that wrote touching poems about beloved pets also nailed conscious cats to boards to study their nervous systems. This contradiction defined Victorian animal relationships, genuine affection coexisting with brutal exploitation. Cats could be family members in one context and experimental subjects in another. The cognitive dissonance was possible because Victorians saw no contradiction between loving individual animals and using animals as categories. The transformation created the foundation for modern cat culture. The ways we think about cats today, as companions deserving affection, as breeds with specific characteristics, as family members warranting grief when they die, emerged from Victorian innovation. But the transformation also created new questions and conflicts. If cats were companions rather than workers, what responsibilities did humans owe them? What about breeding ethics? What about feral populations that resulted from abandoned domestic cats? And what about the wildlife those cats were devastating in ecosystems they'd invaded? The Victorian transformation solved old questions, but created new ones that we're still wrestling with today. The same traits that made cats valuable to humans, exceptional hunting ability, adaptability, independence, have made them catastrophic for ecosystems that evolved without them. This isn't speculation or exaggeration. The scientific evidence is unambiguous and disturbing. Cats are documented as responsible for the extinction of at least 63 species globally, with dozens more critically endangered primarily due to feline predation. The pattern repeats across continents and centuries. Islands suffer worst because their fauna evolved in isolation from mammalian predators. Birds that nested on the ground saw no reason to fear terrestrial hunters. Small reptiles and mammals had no defensive behaviors against an ambush predator that could climb, jump, and move silently. When cats arrived, these species had no evolutionary toolkit for survival. The Stevens Island wren offers the most famous example. This small, flightless bird existed only on Stevens Island in New Zealand. In 1894, a lighthouse keeper arrived with his cat. Within a year, the wren was extinct, killed entirely by a single domestic cat. The species had survived for millennia until one hunter arrived and eliminated it completely. Similar stories repeat across New Zealand, Hawaii, the Caribbean, and countless remote islands where unique species vanished within years or decades of cats' arrival. Australia faces an ongoing crisis. Feral cats, descendants of domestic animals that went wild, number in the millions across the continent. Studies estimate they kill over 1 billion native animals annually. Species that survived for millions of years are now endangered because of predators introduced less than 200 years ago. Conservationists watch helplessly as bilbies, numbats, and other small marsupials disappear despite desperate intervention efforts. Hawaii tells another version of the same story. Native seabirds that nest in burrows on remote slopes face relentless predation from feral cats. Species that once numbered in the hundreds of thousands now cling to existence in the hundreds, protected only through intensive and expensive management programs. Without constant human intervention, they join the growing list of extinctions. But here is the crucial context. Cats are behaving exactly as their evolution designed them to. They efficient predators doing what predators do. They didn't choose to be transported to vulnerable ecosystems. They didn't understand the ecological consequences of their hunting. The responsibility for this damage lies entirely with humans who introduced cats globally without understanding or caring about consequences. This creates an impossible modern dilemma. How do we balance cats' historical importance to human civilization with their current impact on biodiversity? Conservationists advocate for feral cat removal, culling or trapping programs to eliminate cats from sensitive ecosystems. Animal welfare advocates oppose these measures, arguing cats deserve protection and proposing non-lethal alternatives like trap, neuter, return programs. Both sides marshal evidence, both claim ethical high ground, and neither solution fully addresses the complexity. The documentary doesn't pretend there are easy answers. Some contexts demand cat removal to save species on the brink of extinction. Other situations allow for compromise approaches. The key insight is recognizing this as a problem humans created. We carried cats across the world for our benefit. We introduced them to ecosystems we didn't understand. The ecological devastation follows from those decisions, not from any malice inherent to cats. Cats have driven dozens of species to extinction, devastated island ecosystems, and continue killing billions of animals annually. They redoing exactly what humans carried them across the world to do, hunt. Now we must decide what that means. Context matters too. While cats' ecological impact is real and serious, it is part of a much larger pattern of human-caused extinction and disruption. Habitat destruction, climate change, pollution, and industrial agriculture cause far more species loss than cats. Focusing solely on cats risks obscuring bigger problems while vilifying animals that are simply being animals. Despite these conflicts, cats' relationship with humans has only intensified in the modern era. Today, they occupy a unique position among the most beloved animals on Earth, generating billions in economic activity, starring in countless internet videos, yet remaining semi-wild creatures whose behavior still puzzles the scientists and owners who study them most closely. By the mid-2020s, something extraordinary had happened that no historian could have predicted. Cats had become the unofficial mascots of human digital culture. Search for the most viewed, most shared, most engaged content across social media platforms, and cats appear with statistically improbable frequency. Some estimates suggest cat-related content comprises millions of posts daily across platforms. The internet, humanity's most transformative communication technology, has become substantially a delivery system for cat imagery. This didn't happen by corporate planning or cultural mandate. It emerged organically from early internet culture in the 2000s. The website Icon Has Cheeseburger launched in 2007, featuring photos of cats with deliberately misspelled captions in a style that became known as lolspeak. The site became massively popular, spawning countless imitators and establishing cats as prime meme subjects. But these early lolcats were just the beginning. As platforms evolved, YouTube enabling video sharing, Instagram prioritizing visual content, TikTok perfecting short-form video, cats remained at the center. But why? Why not dogs, which humans have lived with for far longer? Why not more exotic animals that might seem more interesting? Research into this question reveals something fascinating about both cats and human psychology. Cats possess qualities that make them perfect internet content. Their behavior combines predictability and unpredictability in ideal proportions. They do recognizably cat-like things, but with individual variations that feel fresh. Their expressiveness translates well to still images and video. Their faces convey emotion that humans interpret easily, whether accurately or not. Most importantly, cats embody a specific combination of dignity and absurdity. They conduct themselves with supreme confidence, then do something ridiculous. This juxtaposition creates endless comedic and emotional content. Psychological research shows people use cat content for emotional regulation. Viewing cat videos measurably reduces stress, increases positive emotions, and provides psychological comfort. In an era of information overload and constant anxiety, cats offer moments of uncomplicated joy. They become emotional infrastructure for digital life. Individual cats leveraged this into genuine celebrity. Grumpy Cat, whose real name was Tardar Sauce, became the most famous feline of the 2010s. Her permanent scowl, caused by feline dwarfism and an underbite, made her instantly recognizable. Before her death in 2019, she appeared in commercials, had her own merchandise line, starred in a movie, and generated an estimated $100 million in economic value. A cat with a funny expression became wealthier than most human celebrities. Lil Bub, another cat with unique physical characteristics, amassed millions of followers and used that platform for charitable work, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for animal welfare. Nala Cat currently holds the Instagram record for most followers of any pet. Over 4 million people regularly view images of a Siamese tabby mix doing ordinary cat things. These aren't anomalies. Dozens of cats have follower counts in the millions, engagement rates that marketing firms study intensely, and economic value that justifies serious business operations. The pet industry reflects this cultural shift. In the United States alone, it generates over $100 billion annually, with cats comprising a massive segment. Food, toys, furniture, clothing, accessories, veterinary care, insurance, entire economies orbit around keeping cats happy and healthy. A grumpy-looking cat named Tartar Sauce made more money than most human celebrities. Millions of people watch cat videos daily for emotional regulation. Cats didn't just conquer the internet. They revealed something fundamental about human psychology itself. This digital dominance represents the culmination of cats' second conquest. They moved from useful workers to Egyptian gods, to useful workers again, to Victorian companions, to finally becoming culturally omnipresent in ways that exceed even their ancient peak. The internet has made cats more universally recognized and emotionally significant than any other non-human species in history. But this phenomenon isn't frivolous. Cats' internet dominance reveals something profound about why cats matter to humans on psychological and emotional levels that transcend practicality or sentiment. To understand this fully, we need to examine what science has discovered about the human-cat bond, why these small predators affect us so deeply. For most of history, the human-cat relationship remained mysterious, understood through observation and intuition rather than measurement. That changed in the 21st century as neuroscience and animal behavior research turned serious attention to something billions of people experience, but few could explain. Why do cats affect us so deeply? MRI studies conducted over the past 2 decades reveal something remarkable. When humans interact with their cats, petting them, playing with them, simply being near them, measurable neurochemical changes occur in both species. Oxytocin levels increase. This hormone associated with bonding and trust surges during cat-human interactions with intensity comparable to human parent-infant bonding. Cortisol, the stress hormone, decreases measurably. Brain reward centers activate, creating positive reinforcement that makes humans seek continued interaction. But the relationship isn't one-directional. Cats experience similar changes. Their oxytocin increases during positive human contact. Their stress indicators decrease in the presence of familiar humans. The bond is mutual, not just humans projecting emotions onto indifferent animals. The communication reveals sophisticated adaptation. Research by animal behaviorists has documented that cats developed specific vocalizations used exclusively with humans, not with other cats. The solicitation purr, a particular frequency and pattern, occurs when cats want something from humans. Studies show humans find this sound nearly impossible to ignore, describing it as urgent or demanding, even when they can articulate why. Cats have essentially hacked human psychology, developing acoustic signals that compel response. Their meowing itself represents adaptation. Adult wild cats rarely vocalize to each other beyond mating and territorial disputes. Domestic cats meow constantly at humans, having learned we respond to vocal communication in ways other cats don't. Each cat develops an individualized vocal repertoire tailored to their specific human companions. They not just making noise, they reconducting learned communication. Research demonstrates cats recognize their owners' voices and adjust behavior accordingly. Experiments show they respond differently to familiar versus unfamiliar humans, displaying what researchers classify as genuine attachment bonds. Using methods adapted from child development psychology, scientists have documented that cats show secure and insecure attachment patterns, similar to human infants, seeking proximity to trusted humans when stressed, and using them as secure bases for exploration. Yet cats maintain independence that makes this bond fascinating. Unlike dogs, which evolved from pack animals and integrate into human hierarchies through subordinate behaviors, cats don't submit, they cooperate. Animal behaviorists like Dr. Dennis Turner and Dr. John Bradshaw describe it as a relationship between equals rather than leader and follower. Cats choose to be near us, but on their terms. This autonomy makes the bond feel earned rather than automatic. The benefits flow both directions. Studies show cat ownership correlates with reduced anxiety, lower blood pressure, and decreased feelings of isolation, particularly among elderly and solitary individuals. Simply petting a cat produces measurable stress reduction. But cats also benefit from positive human companionship, showing improved immune function, lower stress markers, and increased longevity when relationships are healthy. Recent neuroscience research suggests something provocative. Cats may be mimicking human-infant behaviors in ways that trigger nurturing responses. Their vocalizations fall within frequency ranges similar to infant cries. Their size relative to adult humans approximates human babies. Their slow blink trust signals activate the same brain regions associated with parental bonding. Whether this represents evolved manipulation or genuine communication remains debated, but the effect is undeniable. Cats purr at a frequency that promotes human bone healing. They evolved meows used only to communicate with us. They manipulate our parental instincts using the same psychological mechanisms as human infants. Are we keeping cats, or have they domesticated us? The question isn't rhetorical. The scientific evidence suggests cats conquered the world twice, not through strength, size, or numbers, but through our psychological need for their presence. They identified vulnerabilities in human psychology, our response to certain sounds, our need for companionship, our desire for creatures that offer affection without demanding submission, and adapted to exploit them. Or perhaps exploit is the wrong word. Perhaps they simply found a niche in human consciousness and filled it so completely we can imagine life without them. Cats occupy a unique position among domestic animals. They live in our homes, depend on us for food, respond to our presence, yet they remain fundamentally wild. A house cat released into suitable habitat can revert to hunting and surviving independently within weeks. This isn't true of most domestic animals. Cattle can't return to their ancestral forms. Modern chickens couldn't survive without humans. Even dogs, despite their wolf ancestry, struggle to establish wild populations. But cats remember. This paradox, domesticated yet wild, companion yet autonomous, mirrors something fundamental about human nature. We want connection that doesn't require submission, companionship that respects boundaries, affection that leaves us free. Cats provide exactly this, which explains both their appeal and the centuries of human ambivalence toward them. Different cultures have projected radically different meanings onto cats throughout history. Egyptians saw divinity. Medieval Europeans saw evil. Japanese culture associates cats with good luck and prosperity. Modern Americans celebrate their independence. These varying interpretations reveal more about human societies than about cats. Cats function as mirrors reflecting our anxieties, desires, and values back at us. Anthropological research shows that society's treatment of cats correlates measurably with their attitudes toward female autonomy, independence, and nonconformity. Cats have been historically associated with women who lived outside patriarchal control, unmarried women, widows, healers, anyone occupying social margins. This association wasn't accidental. Cats embody qualities that patriarchal systems find threatening: self-sufficiency, refusal to submit, inability to be dominated. Cultures that feared female independence also feared and persecuted cats. Cultures that valued individual autonomy also valued cats. Cats challenge fundamental human assumptions about relationships. They don't perform loyalty displays, they don't seek approval, they can't be commanded. Training a cat means learning what the cat wants and providing it, not imposing your will. Yet millions of humans find these qualities appealing rather than frustrating. What does this reveal? Perhaps humans need relationships that don't reinforce hierarchy. Perhaps we benefit from animals that remind us affection can exist without dominance. Philosopher Simone de Beauvoir wrote about cats as models of autonomous existence, creatures that participate fully in life while maintaining essential selfhood. Animal behaviorist Desmond Morris described the human-cat relationship as unique in domestication history, the only partnership where both parties retain complete freedom to leave. The cat-human relationship offers a model of coexistence rather than control. Cats live alongside us rather than under us. They participate in our lives without surrendering their essential nature. This isn't submission, it is negotiation, cooperation, mutual benefit without hierarchy. This might explain cats' modern cultural dominance in ways economic analysis can't. In an era where many humans feel controlled, surveilled, and lacking autonomy, cats represent freedom, self-determination, and the possibility of connection without submission. They model a way of being that many people aspire to, fully engaged with life while refusing to be owned by it. Consider what this means. Dogs evolved to please us, to fit into our hierarchies, to reflect our desire for loyal subordinates. Dogs are wonderful, but they reinforce power dynamics humans have constructed. Cats evolved to please themselves while tolerating our presence. They don't validate our dominance. They insist on equality as the price of companionship. We domesticated dogs to serve us. Cats domesticated themselves to live beside us. That difference explains everything about cats, about us, and about what we really want from the animals we call companions. Cats conquered the world twice, not through force but through offering humans something we desperately need, a relationship based on mutual choice rather than domination. They showed us over 10,000 years that companionship doesn't require submission, that affection can coexist with autonomy, that connection between species can honor both without diminishing either. Understanding what cats reveal about human nature leads to one final question. Where is this relationship heading? What does the future hold for humanity and the species that conquered our world twice by simply being themselves? Adult cats living in feral colonies rarely meow at each other. They communicate through body language, scent marking, and occasional hisses or yowls during conflicts or mating. Meowing is primarily kitten behavior, a vocalization kittens use to get their mother's attention, to signal distress or hunger, to maintain contact. As cats mature, this behavior typically fades. They learn adult cat communication and abandon the sounds of infancy, except when they live with humans. Domestic cats meow constantly at us. They meow for food, for attention, to be let outside, to be let back in, to announce their presence, to complain about circumstances, seemingly to comment on the weather. This shouldn't happen based on natural cat behavior, but it does universally across cultures and cat populations worldwide. The implication is startling. Cats have adapted kitten communication specifically to maintain lifelong interaction with humans, treating us as a kind of permanent parent figure to whom vocal appeals remain effective. Research from phonetics experts analyzing thousands of cat vocalizations has revealed structure within the seeming chaos. Cats use different meow pitches and lengths for different requests. A short, high-pitched meow often signals greeting. A longer, lower meow frequently indicates demand, usually food-related. Urgent, repeated meows suggest distress or strong desire. These patterns aren't universal across all cats, but they're consistent within individual cat-human relationships. More fascinating still, individual cats develop unique dialects, customized to their specific humans. A cat learns which sounds produce which responses from their particular person, then refines their vocalizations through operant conditioning. If a certain meow pitch gets the food bowl filled faster, that becomes the food request sound. If another pattern successfully summons attention, it becomes the loneliness announcement. Each cat creates a personalized communication system, optimized for their specific human's responses. Some linguists and animal behaviorists suggest this represents a unique form of language development. Cats have essentially created a pigeon communication system, using sounds that bridge feline and human acoustic preferences to achieve mutual understanding. It is not sophisticated language by human standards, but it is functional communication that neither species uses in other contexts. We created it together. Cats invented a language specifically to talk to us, one they don't use with other cats. Every meow, every slow blink, every head bump is a word in a vocabulary they created to bridge the species gap. We're only just beginning to understand what they've been saying all along. Beyond vocalizations, cats have developed other human-specific communication elements. The slow blink, half-closing eyes while looking at someone has been scientifically confirmed as a trust and affection signal. Studies show humans who slow blink back at cats strengthen their bonds. The cats respond with increased affection and proximity. It is a non-vocal dialogue saying, "I trust you enough to reduce my vigilance." The tail-up greeting, approaching with tail held vertically, represents another adapted behavior. Kittens use this signal approaching their mothers. Adult cats reserve it almost exclusively for humans and occasionally for other cats they're bonded with. It signals friendly intention and willingness to interact. Head bumping or bunting serves scent. Marking purposes. Cats have scent glands on their faces. When they rub against us, they're transferring their scent, marking us as part of their social territory. It is simultaneously affectionate and proprietary, a statement of belonging. Research shows experienced cat owners can identify their cat's emotional states from vocalizations with surprising accuracy, often exceeding 70% correct identification. This suggests genuine bidirectional communication is occurring. We're learning their vocabulary, they're learning ours. The relationship builds on mutual interpretation, yet mysteries remain. Why do cats knead with their paws, pushing rhythmically against soft surfaces or human laps? Theories suggest comfort behavior retained from nursing, but the full explanation eludes us. Why do they bring us dead animals, offering, teaching, or something else entirely? Why do they stare intently at empty spaces, seeing or sensing things we can't detect? Despite living alongside us for 10,000 years, cats remain partially unknowable. Their minds operate on logics we don't fully understand, and perhaps this mystery is part of their appeal. They're familiar enough to love, strange enough to fascinate, close enough to communicate with, but far enough from human cognition to remind us that consciousness takes many forms. Evolution isn't finished with cats. The process that began when wild cats first approached human grain stores 10,000 years ago continues today, in apartments and houses across the world, invisible but measurable. Genetic research reveals that cat genomes remain under active selection pressure, with specific genes related to behavior, digestion, and cognition showing changes within just the last few thousand years, recent enough that the evolution is essentially happening in real time. What is changing? Cats are becoming more tolerant of population density. Wild cats maintain solitary territories and rarely coexist peacefully with other adults outside breeding seasons. Yet modern domestic cats increasingly live in multi-cat households, sharing spaces that would be impossibly small by wild standards. This didn't happen by chance. Cats that couldn't tolerate proximity didn't reproduce as successfully in human environments. Those that could adapted thrived and passed tolerance genes to offspring. Their digestion is adapting too. Commercial cat food contains carbohydrates that pure carnivores shouldn't process efficiently. Yet domestic cats increasingly carry genetic variants that improve carbohydrate metabolism. They're becoming omnivores in ways their ancestors weren't shaped by what humans feed them across hundreds of generations. Cognition may be changing most dramatically. Recent studies suggest domestic cats have developed enhanced abilities to read human facial expressions and emotional states compared to wild relatives. They recognize angry versus happy faces. They respond to human pointing gestures, something wild felids ignore. They've developed what researchers call social cognition, the ability to model what others are thinking or feeling. Essentially, they're getting better at understanding us, generation by generation. Urban environments accelerate these changes. Studies tracking city cat populations show behavioral modifications occurring within just decades. Urban cats display increased boldness around humans, altered hunting patterns that account for artificial light and human schedules, and modified territorial behaviors that allow higher population densities. These aren't individual adjustments. Genetic analysis shows heritable components. Urban cats are becoming a distinct subpopulation adapted specifically to city life. But evolution isn't uniform. Feral cat populations maintaining minimal human contact retain wild-type behaviors, aggression, solitary habits, extreme wariness. This variation reveals that domestication is environmentally contingent, not inevitable. The same species diverges based on selective pressures in different contexts. Research into cat personalities confirms hereditary components. Shy cats tend to produce shy offspring. Bold cats produce bold offspring. Aggression, sociability, and playfulness all show genetic influences. Humans preferentially keep and breed cats with specific temperaments. Friendly, tolerant, gentle. This creates ongoing natural selection as certain behavioral traits become more common in domestic populations while others fade. The cats sleeping on our couches are evolving right now, adapting to human homes, human emotions, human food. In 10,000 years, our descendants might look at cats and barely recognize the creatures we knew. Evolution never stops. It is happening in every generation. Project forward another 100 centuries of shared evolution. Will cats lose their characteristic independence, becoming more dog-like in their attachment? Will they develop even more sophisticated communication abilities, perhaps understanding human speech at levels currently impossible? Will they physically change, smaller, larger, different colors and patterns selected for aesthetic preferences? Or will they maintain their essential catness, that quality of autonomous wildness that defines them, even as they adapt in countless subtle ways? The answer depends on us as much as them. We shape their evolution through which cats we keep, which we breed, which behaviors we reward or discourage. While cats change, so does the world around them. Climate change, urbanization, and technological development create environments their wild ancestors never faced. Cats must adapt to these new conditions, or humans must help them navigate challenges evolution hasn't prepared them for. The world through cat eyes is a place of movement and shadow, where the flicker of a moth's wing across a room is as vivid as a lightning strike. But distant objects blur into impressionist paintings. Cats see color, but not as we do. They possess fewer red cone receptors, shifting their visual palette toward blues and greens. Reds and oranges appear muted, almost grayscale. The vibrant sunset that stops humans in awe registers to cats as a subtle gradient barely worth noticing. But what they lose in color richness, they gain elsewhere. Cat eyes contain 6 to 8 times more rod receptors than human eyes, making them extraordinary night vision specialists. The tapetum lucidum, the reflective layer behind their retinas that causes eye shine, bounces light back through photoreceptors twice, amplifying sensitivity. In darkness where humans see nothing, cats see clearly. They evolved as crepuscular hunters, active during dawn and dusk when light levels confound human vision, but perfectly suit feline perception. Their motion detection exceeds ours dramatically. A cat registers movement humans miss entirely. The twitch of a distant bird's tail, the vibration of an insect's legs changes so subtle, they don't cross human perceptual thresholds. Yet their distance vision lacks human sharpness. Objects beyond 20 feet lose detail, becoming suggestions rather than clear images. Sound defines their world even more than sight. Cats hear frequencies up to 64,000 Hz. Humans top out around 20,000. This means cats perceive an entire dimension of acoustic reality completely inaccessible to us. They hear rodent ultrasonic communications, the high-frequency squeaks mice use to coordinate. They detect the buzz of electronics humans consider silent. The world hums and squeals with sounds we'll never know exist. Their whiskers are organs of exquisite sensitivity, detecting air currents with precision that borders on supernatural. Each whisker connects to muscle and nerve networks, providing spatial information. In complete darkness, whiskers map rooms, identify obstacles, gauge whether openings are navigable. Cats literally feel space in ways humans can't comprehend. Smell creates yet another layer. Cat olfactory ability is roughly 14 times more acute than human smell. But beyond intensity, they possess an additional organ humans lack entirely: the vomeronasal organ, located in the roof of their mouths. This detects pheromones and chemical signals invisible to human noses. When cats make that strange open-mouthed expression called flamen response, they're channeling sense to this organ, reading chemical stories we can't access. These sensory differences explain behaviors humans find inexplicable. Staring at nothing likely means detecting air currents, ultrasonic sounds, or scent gradients humans don't perceive. Sudden sprinting might respond to sounds outside human hearing. Fascination with specific spots relates to temperature variations, airflow patterns, or scent accumulations completely beneath human notice. Your cat sees colors you don't see, hears sounds you'll never hear, and smells stories written in scents you can't detect. They live in the same physical space as you, but in a completely different sensory universe. What must they think of us, blind and deaf to most of their reality? Cats inhabit a perceptual universe fundamentally alien to human experience, richer in some dimensions, poorer in others, but genuinely other. Despite intimacy, despite thousands of years of cohabitation, they remain separate in consciousness. Respecting this difference is part of honoring their nature. Understanding their sensory world helps explain why they're such effective hunters. Every sense evolved for detecting and catching prey. But this creates ongoing tensions in modern contexts where we want them as companions, not predators. The cat purring on your lap, kneading contentedly with half-closed eyes, is a perfect killing machine. This isn't tea metaphor or exaggeration. It is biological fact. Every aspect of cat anatomy and behavior evolved for hunting. Retractable claws that stay sharp, flexible spines enabling impossible twists mid-leap, eyes that track minute movements, patience that can hold still for hours waiting for the perfect moment to strike. We've invited apex predators into our homes and asked them to be soft. The statistics reveal what denial obscures. Domestic cats in the United States alone kill an estimated 1.3 to 4 billion birds annually. Mammal deaths range from 6.3 to 22.3 billion per year. Mice, voles, shrews, rabbits, squirrels. These aren't activist estimates designed to shock. They reviewed research published in Nature Communications, calculated through rigorous methodology, accounting for both pet and feral populations. The numbers stagger comprehension: billions, every year from creatures we consider companions. That sweet cat sleeping in a sunbeam is a perfect killing machine, virtually unchanged from ancestors who hunted the African savannas. We invite predators into our homes, then ask them to stop being predators. That contradiction defines the modern human-cat relationship. The hunting doesn't stem from hunger. Well, fed cats hunt as enthusiastically as hungry ones, often more so because they have energy for the chase. Hunting behavior is intrinsically rewarding, triggering dopamine release in feline brains regardless of whether the cat needs food. Evolution designed this. Predators that only hunted when starving would starve frequently. Better to hunt whenever opportunity presents, building surplus when possible. The sequence breaks into distinct stages: stalk, pounce, catch, kill, consume. Each stage is independently motivating. Cats may stalk without pouncing, pounce without catching, catch without killing, kill without eating. The reward comes from the behavior itself, not the outcome. This explains why cats bring dead animals home without eating them. The killing satisfied the instinct. Consumption is optional. Their efficiency exceeds most wild predators. Cats succeed in roughly 1/3 of hunting attempts. Lions, often considered apex predators, succeed about 25% of the time. Cats are opportunistic generalists, taking any prey they can catch: birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, large insects. They hunt during dawn and dusk when many prey species are most active and when cat vision gives maximum advantage. This creates moral dilemmas with no clean solutions. Keep cats indoors and you protect wildlife but potentially compromise feline well-being. Mental stimulation, exercise, environmental enrichment. Let them outdoors and you honor their nature but enable ecological destruction. Both positions have legitimate foundations. Animal welfare advocates emphasize cats' psychological needs. Indoor, only cats can develop stress, obesity, and behavioral problems without adequate enrichment. Cats evolved to patrol territories, hunt, climb, explore. 4 walls and a scratching post may not suffice. Conservationists counter with extinction data. Island species driven to oblivion by introduced cats. Bird populations decimated. Ecosystems destabilized. The ecological cost isn't theoretical. It is documented, ongoing, and accelerating as cat populations expand. The tension exists precisely because we've created an unnatural situation. We've spread cats globally beyond their original range. We've maintained them at population densities far exceeding what wild felids could sustain. We've fed them, sheltered them, enabled their reproduction, and protected them from predators that would naturally control their numbers. Then we're surprised when they behave as evolution designed them to. There are no perfect solutions. Indoor cats with enrichment can thrive. Climbing structures, puzzle feeders, interactive play that simulates hunting. Outdoor enclosures offer compromise. Safe outdoor access without free roaming. Some advocate for keeping cats exclusively indoors in ecologically sensitive areas while allowing outdoor access where wildlife impacts are minimal. Others argue that cat ownership itself is ethically problematic given inevitable ecological consequences. Honest recognition of these trade-offs surpasses denial. We've made cats the most successful predator on Earth by population and range. We maintain them, we feed them, we enable their predation. The responsibility is ours, not theirs. They were simply being what they are. Understanding cats' predatory nature doesn't condemn us to choosing between ecological destruction and animal cruelty. It points toward a third path, creating indoor environments that satisfy behavioral needs without requiring outdoor hunting. This approach, called environmental enrichment, has transformed veterinary thinking about cat care over the past 2 decades. Research from veterinary behaviorists reveals cats need specific stimulation types. Vertical space ranks highest. Cats feel secure when they can climb and observe from elevation, surveying territory from safe vantage points. This isn't aesthetic preference. It is evolutionary imperative. Cats evolved as both predators and prey for larger carnivores. Height means safety. A cat with access to vertical territory experiences measurably lower stress than one confined to floor level. Hiding spots satisfy this dual nature. Cats need places to retreat, to watch unseen, to feel protected. Boxes, tunnels, covered beds, these aren't luxuries but psychological necessities for animals whose survival once depended on concealment. Play that mimics hunting provides perhaps the most critical enrichment. Interactive toys replicating prey movement trigger deep-seated chase responses. Wand toys with feathers flutter like birds. Small toys that skitter across floors move like rodents. Puzzle feeders make cats work for food. Engaging problem-solving abilities that would naturally serve hunting strategy. Sensory variety matters too. Different textures, safe outdoor viewing spots, rotating novel objects, all provide mental stimulation that prevents the learned helplessness and depression that can afflict understimulated indoor cats. Some households incorporate catios, enclosed outdoor spaces providing environmental complexity without free, roaming risks. Cats access weather, wind, natural sounds, and visual stimulation while remaining contained. Studies show environmental enrichment significantly reduces behavioral problems plaguing indoor-only cats: aggression, anxiety, inappropriate elimination, destructive scratching. These behaviors often stem from boredom and frustrated instincts rather than malice. Cats acting out aren't being bad, they're being unstimulated. But enrichment requires effort. Products alone don't suffice. Cats need active engagement. Play sessions should happen daily, ideally twice, morning and evening, matching their crepuscular activity peaks. Sessions should last 10 to 15 minutes, using toys that simulate specific prey types. Bird-like toys move erratically through air, triggering leaping attacks. Mouse-like toys skitter along floors, inspiring stalking and pouncing. Ethologically informed play follows the predatory sequence: stalk, chase, catch, kill. Sessions should end with capture, letting the cat successfully catch the toy, followed by a small meal. This completes the sequence satisfyingly, providing psychological closure that pure chase without capture lacks. The cat enrichment industry has exploded, generating billions in specialized products. But understanding the why behind cats' needs matters more than purchasing solutions. A cardboard box can provide more enrichment than expensive cat furniture if positioned correctly and rotated regularly to maintain novelty. Research on indoor cats' health reveals complex trade-offs. Outdoor cats face undeniable risks: vehicles, predators, disease, fights, poisoning. They live shorter lives on average. But indoor cats without enrichment suffer different problems: obesity, boredom, related stress, behavioral disorders. Indoor life isn't automatically humane. It requires active environmental design. Cats don't need to kill birds to be happy, but they need to stalk, chase, pounce, and catch. Denying their predatory nature doesn't make them less dangerous to wildlife, it just makes them bored, frustrated, and stressed. The solution isn't suppressing their instincts, but redirecting them. Respecting cats means acknowledging what they are, predators, and creating environments that channel these instincts appropriately. This honors their nature while protecting wildlife, representing genuine ethical progress over denial or false choices. While enrichment addresses behavioral needs, another crucial aspect of modern cat care involves medical and nutritional science. And here too, understanding cats' evolutionary history as obligate carnivores shapes best practices. Cats cannot be vegetarians. This isn't preference or stubbornness, it is biochemistry. Cats are obligate carnivores, meaning their physiology absolutely requires nutrients found only in animal tissue. Unlike dogs or humans who are omnivores capable of synthesizing certain nutrients from plant sources, cats have lost these metabolic pathways through millions of years of exclusive meat eating. Their bodies assume meat and cannot function properly without it. The specific requirements reveal their evolutionary history. Cats need taurine, an amino acid abundant in animal muscle and heart tissue, but absent from plants. Without adequate taurine, cats develop dilated cardiomyopathy, heart failure, and retinal degeneration, leading to blindness. They need arachidonic acid, a fatty acid cats cannot synthesize from plant precursors the way omnivores can. They require preformed vitamin A from animal sources. Unlike most mammals, they cannot convert plant carotenoids into active vitamin A. Their protein requirements far exceed other domestic animals because their metabolism is adapted to gluconeogenesis, producing blood glucose from protein rather than storing and using carbohydrates efficiently. These adaptations reflect their ancestral environment. Cats descended from desert-dwelling predators who obtained all nutrients and hydration from prey animals. They never encountered plant materials in significant quantities and never evolved mechanisms for processing them efficiently. A wild cat eating a mouse consumes roughly 55% protein, 45% fat, and virtually no carbohydrates, all from animal tissue, packaged with moisture content around 70%. Now consider modern commercial cat food. Many popular brands contain 30 to 50% of calories from carbohydrates, grains, potatoes, peas, starches used as cheap fillers and kibble structure. This is malice, it is economics and manufacturing constraints. Dry kibble cannot exist without starch to bind it. Plant proteins cost less than animal proteins, but the result is cats eating diets their physiology never evolved to process. Cats are desert, evolved carnivores whose bodies expect to eat whole prey animals. Instead, we feed them grain-based kibble with protein percentages that would horrify their ancestors. That mismatch explains epidemics of feline diabetes, obesity, and chronic disease that wild felids rarely experience. Veterinary research increasingly links high carbohydrate diets to metabolic diseases afflicting domestic cats. Feline diabetes has increased dramatically over decades, correlating with increased kibble feeding. Obesity affects over half of domestic cats in the United States. Urinary tract problems, kidney disease, inflammatory bowel disease all show connections to dietary composition, particularly carbohydrate levels and moisture content. This has spawned intense controversy. Raw food advocates argue cats should eat prey, model diets mimicking whole animals, muscle meat, organs, bones, minimal processing. They point to ancestral diets and improved health outcomes in some cats switching to raw feeding. Veterinary nutritionists counter that raw diets carry food safety risks, bacterial contamination, parasites, and may be nutritionally unbalanced without careful formulation. They emphasize that commercial foods undergo feeding trials and nutritional analysis that home-prepared diets often lack. The documentary doesn't advocate specific approaches, but emphasizes that understanding cats' obligate carnivore physiology enables informed decisions. Critical label reading helps. Look for animal proteins as primary ingredients. Understand that crude protein percentages can mislead, since quality matters more than quantity. Recognize that cats need moisture, rich foods because they're desert. Adapted physiology gives them low thirst drive. making them prone to chronic dehydration on dry, food-only diets. Some veterinarians recommend wet food as closer to cats' evolutionary diet, higher protein, lower carbohydrates, adequate moisture. Others argue quality kibble can support health if cats drink enough water. The answer likely varies by individual cat, their health status, and their specific needs. What is clear is that nutritional science represents just one dimension where cats' evolutionary history creates mismatches with modern domestic life. These mismatches often explain behavioral and health problems cat owners face. Problems that seem mysterious until viewed through the lens of evolutionary biology. The Stevens Island wren lived on a small island in New Zealand, Marlborough Sounds. It was small, about 10 centimeters long, with mottled brown feathers and wings too weak for flight. The species had existed for thousands of years in isolation, evolving without mammalian predators in an ecosystem where the primary threats came from the sky, not the ground. In 1894, a lighthouse keeper arrived with his cat. Within a year, perhaps less, the wren was gone. An entire species' millennia of evolutionary history erased in months because one predator arrived in a place where nothing had prepared prey for its existence. This story, though more complex than originally told, feral cats were likely already present, represents a pattern that has repeated across hundreds of islands worldwide. The kakapo, a flightless parrot found only in New Zealand, once numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Today, fewer than 250 individuals survive, their decline driven partly by introduced cats hunting birds that never learn to fear ground-based predators. Hawaiian petrels, Bermuda petrels, countless species of endemic birds, reptiles, and small mammals. The list of species driven to extinction or near extinction by cats extends across every ocean. Islands are particularly vulnerable because evolution never prepared their inhabitants for what cats represent. Species that evolved without mammalian predators lack defensive behaviors. Ground, nesting birds sit calmly as predators approach. Small mammals don't through from cat scent. Populations are often small and geographically restricted. Local extinction means global extinction. Island ecosystems have less functional redundancy, so removing one species triggers cascade effects through entire food webs. Scientific evidence shows that on many islands, cats have caused or contributed to dozens of extinctions. Creatures found nowhere else on Earth, now vanished forever, not declining, not endangered, gone. Their genetic lineages, their adaptations, their ecological roles, erased by an introduced predator. Conservation responses have been dramatic and controversial. New Zealand launched ambitious programs to eradicate all invasive predators from offshore islands, creating cat-free refuges for endangered species. Australia implements controversial feral cat culling programs, shooting and poisoning thousands of cats annually to protect native wildlife. Hawaii wages ongoing battles to protect seabirds from predation, using fencing, trapping, and lethal control around breeding colonies. These programs generate intense conflicts. Animal welfare advocates oppose killing cats, arguing all sentient beings deserve protection regardless of their ecological impact. TNR, trap, neuter, return advocates propose non-lethal management, sterilizing and releasing cats rather than euthanizing them. Conservationists insist that protecting native species requires removing invasive predators, period. Half measures one T-save species on the brink of extinction. The ethics cut deep. Cats in these situations aren't T-villains. They redoing what evolution designed them to do, hunt efficiently. Humans created this problem by introducing cats to ecosystems that could sustain them. Yet acknowledging human responsibility doesn't eliminate the immediate crisis. Endangered species are dying now. Difficult decisions must be made. On islands across the world, conservation rangers hunt cats to save species found nowhere else on Earth. It is brutal, heartbreaking work, killing one species to save another, whose life matters more. The endemic bird found only on this island, or the cat humans brought here. There are no good answers. Conservationists show photographs of extinct species, the last known individuals, preserved in museums, reminders of what has already been lost. They plead for remaining populations hanging by threads. Cat advocates show images of killed cats, bodies in piles, animals that felt pain and fear, creatures that didn't choose to be invasive. Ecologists try finding solutions that work given biological and political realities, knowing that perfect solutions don't exist. The documentary doesn't resolve this conflict. It can. These are genuinely competing values. Biodiversity versus individual animal welfare, native species versus introduced species, ecosystems versus charismatic predators. Both sides hold legitimate moral positions. Both sides can cite evidence. Both sides care deeply. Island situations represent worst-case scenarios, where impacts are undeniable and decisions are stark. But mainland environments also face significant cat impacts. Harder to measure, more politically complicated to address, particularly in urban and suburban areas where human attitudes toward cats vary wildly, and where millions of people have deep emotional bonds with the predators conservationists want controlled. In alleyways behind restaurants, beneath highway overpasses, in the forgotten corners of parking lots and abandoned buildings, feral cats live in colonies numbering from a handful to dozens. Estimates suggest 30 to 80 million feral cats exist in the United States alone. Cats born wild or abandoned by owners, living entirely outside human homes, reproducing rapidly in populations ecologists call subsidized predators. Their densities far exceed what natural ecosystems could support because humans provide the subsidy, garbage, deliberate feeding, shelter in human-built structures, and they hunt. Constantly, this created a problem demanding response. The question became, what kind of response? TNR, trap, neuter, return, emerged as one answer. The approach works like this. Volunteers trap feral cats using humane cages, transport them to veterinarians for spaying or neutering, then return them to their original locations. Volunteers continue feeding and monitoring colonies indefinitely. The theory suggests populations decline through attrition without killing animals. Cats live out their lives but produce no offspring. Colonies shrink over years, and the approach remains socially acceptable in urban environments where many residents oppose killing cats. TNR advocates describe it as compassionate pragmatism. These are sentient beings capable of suffering, they argue, and society owes them humane treatment, regardless of how they came to exist. Research shows TNR can reduce colony sizes over time when combined with rigorous enforcement preventing new cats from joining colonies, and when adoption rates remove cats faster than attrition alone would achieve. Wildlife advocates see something entirely different. They see ecological denial dressed as compassion. Even neutered cats continue hunting and killing wildlife. Sterilization doesn't eliminate predatory behavior. Studies show most TNR programs don't reduce populations because compliance is insufficient and new abandonment continues. Some research suggests fed cat colonies actually attract more abandoned cats, potentially worsening the problem rather than solving it. The research shows both sides have evidence. TNR can work in specific controlled circumstances, small colonies, aggressive enforcement, high adoption rates, committed volunteers, but real-world implementation often fails to achieve these conditions. Colonies persist for decades, wildlife continues dying. The gap between theory and practice remains vast. The emotional intensity of this debate exceeds most environmental conflicts. For TNR volunteers, these colonies represent years of caregiving labor and emotional investment. They arrive before dawn to feed cats in freezing weather. They pay veterinary bills from their own pockets. They trap sick cats and nurse them back to health. They socialize kittens for adoption, finding homes one by one. Suggesting euthanasia feels like condemning animals they've protected through extraordinary personal sacrifice. For wildlife advocates, TNR represents prioritizing invasive predators over native species and refusing to acknowledge harsh realities. They show data on declining bird populations. They document ground nesting species disappearing from parks where cat colonies exist. They argue that emotional attachment to cats shouldn't override conservation necessity when native species face extinction. TNR volunteers spend their own money, time, and hearts caring for feral cats, believing they're saving lives humanely. Wildlife advocates see the same programs enabling subsidized predators that devastate bird populations. Both sides have evidence. Both sides are absolutely certain they're right. Who gets to decide which lives matter more? Individual perspectives reveal the conflict's depth. A TNR volunteer describes feeding colonies daily for 15 years, knowing every cat by name, understanding their personalities, mourning each death. She has found homes for hundreds of kittens, prevented thousands of births through sterilization, and believes she is doing the best possible work given limited options. A wildlife biologist shows graphs of regional bird declines correlating with cat colony locations. He has documented species disappearing from areas they inhabited for decades. He argues that refusing lethal control means choosing cats over birds, invasive species over native species, emotional comfort over ecological responsibility. Attempts at compromise exist. Aggressive spay, neuter programs combined with adoption efforts, and mandatory indoor cat policies reduce abandonment at the source. Working cat programs place feral cats in barns and warehouses where their hunting benefits humans without harming vulnerable wildlife. Some municipalities implement targeted approaches, TNR, in certain areas, removal in ecologically sensitive zones. But the fundamental conflict persists because it is about values, not just facts. Whether individual animal welfare or ecosystem health should take precedence when they conflict. These are questions science illuminates but cannot answer. Different ethical frameworks produce different conclusions, all internally consistent, all passionately defended. The recommendations from veterinarians and conservation biologists converge on similar points: keep cats indoors or in enclosed outdoor spaces, spay and neuter all cats, never abandon cats, microchip and identify owned cats to prevent confusion with ferals, provide adequate enrichment for indoor living. These suggestions sound simple. Implementation proves anything but. Many cat owners resist these recommendations. They believe outdoor access is necessary for cats' well-being, that confining cats is cruel, that their individual cat's impact is minimal compared to larger environmental problems. These aren't irrational positions. They reflect genuine concern for cats and skepticism about being blamed for systemic issues. But evidence complicates these intuitions. Studies show indoor cats live longer on average, 12 to 18 years versus 2 to 5 years for outdoor cats. They experience fewer injuries, diseases, parasites, and violent deaths. With proper enrichment, they exhibit excellent quality of life by every measurable welfare indicator. The belief that cats need outdoor access for happiness contradicts veterinary behavioral science. Individual impacts matter more than intuition suggests. Even single cats kill hundreds of animals annually. Multiply this across millions of outdoor cats, and collective impact becomes staggering. The "my cat barely hunts" perception often reflects that owners don't see most kills. Cats consume prey elsewhere, hide bodies, or hunt when humans aren't watching. Comparative data from countries with higher rates of indoor cat keeping show better outcomes for both cats and wildlife. Indoor cats experience lower mortality. Native species face reduced predation pressure. The correlation isn't coincidental, but legitimate concerns complicate simple prescriptions. Keeping cats indoors requires more human effort and investment, time for play, money for enrichment, space for vertical territory. Not all housing situations accommodate this easily. Low-income cat owners may lack resources for extensive enrichment or veterinary care. Class dimensions make universal standards easier to proclaim than achieve. Telling people what they should do is simpler than addressing systemic barriers preventing them from doing it. A single parent working multiple jobs may struggle to provide daily play sessions. Someone in unstable housing may not afford cat trees and puzzle feeders. Veterinary care costs can exceed monthly budgets. These aren't excuses. They're realities shaping what responsible ownership can mean in practice. Emerging approaches address these barriers. Community-supported spay, neuter clinics provide free or low-cost services. Pet food banks help low-income owners maintain their cats without abandonment. Educational programs teach enrichment techniques requiring creativity rather than expensive products. Cardboard boxes, paper bags, rotating existing toys using household items for play. Veterinarians, shelter workers, and cat owners themselves increasingly discuss what responsibility means practically rather than theoretically. It means recognizing that cat welfare and wildlife protection aren't inherently opposed. Measures protecting wildlife, keeping cats indoors, also protect cats from vehicles, predators, disease, fights, poisoning, and human cruelty. Framing this as either cats or wildlife creates false opposition when the real question is how humans manage relationships with animals we brought into ecosystems. Every year, millions of cats are killed by cars, coyotes, and disease. Deaths that indoor living would prevent millions more kill billions of birds and mammals. The solution isn't choosing between cats and wildlife. It is choosing to take responsibility for the animals we claim to love. Responsibility extends beyond individual owners to society. We need accessible veterinary care regardless of income, effective enforcement against abandonment and failure to sterilize. Cultural shifts viewing outdoor roaming as neglectful rather than natural for owned cats. Changes in how pet stores, breeders, and adoption centers educate new owners about indoor keeping and enrichment. Addressing cat-wildlife conflicts requires changes at individual and societal levels. But it requires something else too, acknowledging that cats themselves have interests and needs that shouldn't be ignored in pursuit of conservation goals. Finding solutions means respecting both cats and wildlife, a balance we must strike as we consider cats' future. The cat genome has been decoded, mapped, and made readable. Scientists now understand which genes create tabby patterns, which produce blue eyes, which determine body size and bone structure. They can identify genetic markers for hereditary diseases, polycystic kidney disease, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, progressive retinal atrophy. They can trace ancestry, determine relatedness, and increasingly, they can predict behavioral tendencies from genetic profiles. This knowledge opens possibilities that would have seemed like science fiction a generation ago. Genetic testing now enables breeders to identify cats carrying disease alleles before breeding them, potentially eliminating hereditary conditions that have plagued certain breeds for generations. Persian cats with kidney disease genes can be removed from breeding programs. Maine Coons with heart condition markers can be identified early. The suffering these diseases cause could theoretically be bred out within decades through informed selection, but the science enables more than disease prevention. Researchers have identified genetic markers associated with temperament traits, boldness, sociability, aggression, hunting drive. If these traits are heritable and genetically influenced, they become theoretically selectable. Breeders could select for cats with reduced prey drive, creating lines that hunt less intensively, or for enhanced sociability, producing cats even more tolerant of human handling. Techniques like CRISPR enable direct genetic modification rather than just selection. Scientists have successfully used gene therapy to treat hereditary blindness in cats, restoring vision to animals born without it. This represents proof of concept genetic medicine works in felines. The same techniques could theoretically address other conditions or modify traits beyond disease. Some researchers explore whether genetic interventions could reduce hunting behavior in domestic cats. If specific genes regulate prey drive intensity, could they be edited to lower predation without eliminating cats' essential nature? The question hovers between theoretical possibility and active research, raising profound ethical questions faster than society develops frameworks to answer them. Scientists can now read and potentially rewrite cat genes. They could eliminate hereditary diseases, reduce hunting drive, even create cats that glow in the dark. But should they? When we have the power to redesign other species, what are the limits of what we're entitled to change? Bioethicists, veterinarians, and animal behaviorists debate these questions with increasing urgency. Some argue genetic intervention could reduce suffering, eliminating diseases, resolving conflicts over hunting, potentially enabling richer communication between species. If we can prevent cats from developing painful hereditary conditions, isn't that obligation rather than overreach? Others counter that such interventions represent anthropocentric arrogance, reshaping another species to suit human preferences rather than accepting them as they are. Who decides which traits are desirable? Reducing hunting behavior might address human concerns about wildlife, but it fundamentally changes what cats are, apex predators whose entire physiology evolved for hunting. Do we have the right to eliminate aspects of their nature that inconvenience us? The debate mirrors broader questions about genetic engineering, consent, and the limits of human power over other species. Cats cannot consent to genetic modification. They cannot express preferences about their own genomes. Decisions are made for them by humans pursuing human-defined goals. Some scientists have proposed genetic biocontrol for feral populations, introducing genetic modifications that reduce fertility over generations, potentially replacing lethal control with genetic management. This remains controversial and unimplemented, raising concerns about unintended consequences and ecological ethics. Less controversial applications emerge constantly. Genetic research improves understanding of cat health, enabling better treatments for feline diseases. Studies of genes affecting cognition and sensory systems reveal how cats experience reality. Genetic ancestry testing, now commercially available for cats, helps owners understand their cat's backgrounds and potential health predispositions. Whether or not dramatic genetic interventions occur, genetic science is fundamentally changing how we understand cats. Knowledge itself transforms relationships by revealing biological realities underlying behavior we previously interpreted through anthropomorphic assumptions. Understanding that a cat's hunting isn't malice but genetic imperative changes how we respond. Recognizing that certain temperament traits are heritable shifts how we think about behavior modification. Genetic science represents just one dimension of cats' future. Urbanization, climate change, and technological development create new environments cats must navigate, or that humans must help them adapt to. We live in the Anthropocene, the geological epoch defined by human dominance of Earth's systems. Every ecosystem bears our fingerprints. Every climate pattern reflects our influence. Every species navigates a world reshaped by human activity, whether they evolved alongside us or not. For cats, creatures that conquered the world twice through their relationship with humans, this epoch represents both familiar territory and unprecedented challenge. Urban environments have become many cats' primary habitat. These represent ecosystems radically different from the semi-arid scrublands where wild cats first approached human settlements. Concrete absorbs and radiates heat, creating urban heat islands where temperatures exceed surrounding areas by 10 to 20 degrees. Artificial light disrupts circadian rhythms evolved over millions of years for crepuscular hunting. Noise pollution assaults hearing evolved to detect mouse heartbeats from meters away. Food webs operate on principles wildly different from natural systems. Rodents live on human refuse. Birds nest on artificial structures, and nothing follows patterns cats' ancestors would recognize. Yet cats adapt. Research reveals urban cats showing behavioral differences from rural populations. Their activity patterns shift around human schedules rather than dawn and dusk. Territorial behaviors modify. Urban cats maintain smaller territories in dense areas, overlapping ranges they would have defended violently in wild contexts. They demonstrate increased tolerance of other cats, coexisting at densities impossible in natural environments. Some studies suggest urban cats undergo selection for specific traits more rapidly than rural populations. Boldness around humans provides advantages in cities where resources concentrate near people. Reduced aggression toward other cats enables survival in unavoidable proximity. Flexibility in hunting patterns allows exploitation of novel prey species and feeding opportunities. Evolution hasn't stopped. It is accelerated in response to radically altered selective pressures. Climate change introduces challenges cats' desert. Adapted physiology handles variably. Rising temperatures affect comfort ranges less than they might for cold. Adapted species, but extreme heat still threatens, particularly for long-haired breeds developed through human selection. Extreme weather events, floods, wildfires, hurricanes, displace owned and feral populations, destroying territories cats may have inhabited for generations. Shifting ecosystems alter prey availability and disease patterns in ways that will unfold across decades. New infectious diseases spread through cat populations. Changing parasite distributions follow climate shifts, bringing tropical diseases into temperate regions. Environmental pollutants accumulate in feline bodies through contaminated prey. Microplastics appear in cat tissues just as they appear in every tested species. The long-term consequences remain unknown, but the exposure is undeniable. Cats survived the extinction of their divine status in Egypt, the medieval witch trials, and the Black Death. Now they face challenges their evolution never prepared them for: artificial light, urban heat islands, microplastics in their prey. Will their legendary adaptability be enough, or will they need our help to survive the world we've created? Their adaptability remains remarkable. Cats successfully colonize virtually every terrestrial ecosystem humans inhabit, from Arctic research stations where they live entirely indoors to tropical megacities where they navigate dense human populations. They've adapted to apartment living despite evolving as wide-ranging hunters. They've maintained behavioral flexibility, enabling rapid response to novel circumstances. Technology enables new forms of cat care and monitoring. GPS collars track movements, revealing how cats use space in ways that surprise owners. The indoor-outdoor cat who actually roams across dozens of properties. The lazy cat who hunts actively during human sleep hours. Smart feeders and litter boxes monitor eating and elimination patterns, potentially detecting health problems before symptoms become obvious. Telemedicine connects cat owners with veterinary advice remotely, particularly valuable in rural areas or during emergencies. The quantified cat phenomenon emerges, owners using technology to track and optimize cats' health and behavior through data. Apps monitor activity levels, sleep patterns, caloric intake. Wearable sensors detect abnormal vital signs. The benefits seem clear: early disease detection, better understanding of individual cats' needs, evidence-based care decisions. But questions arise. Does fixation on measurable metrics miss holistic well-being? Does constant monitoring enhance relationships or reduce cats to data points? Veterinarians and technologists debate whether these tools genuinely improve feline welfare or primarily satisfy human desires for control and quantification. Cats' future depends partly on their own adaptability, demonstrated across 10,000 years of human partnership, but largely on human choices. How we design cities determines whether urban environments remain hostile or become genuinely habitable for cats. How we respond to climate change affects every species, cats included. How we conceptualize our responsibilities toward animals we've spread globally shapes whether cats thrive or merely survive. The physical world cats inhabit is transforming rapidly, but perhaps the most significant changes involve something less tangible: culture. How humans think about cats, relate to them, and assign meaning to their presence is shifting in ways that may prove more consequential than any environmental change. Cats occupy cultural space no other animal approaches. They dominate internet content, generating billions of views, shares, and interactions daily. They inspire merchandising industries worth billions. Cat-themed clothing, home goods, art, accessories proliferating across markets. They feature prominently in contemporary art and literature. Individual cats serve as social media influencers with audiences exceeding most human celebrities, their daily activities documented and monetized like entertainment products. This isn't nostalgia or continuation of historical patterns. This is new. Even during cats' Egyptian divine status, they weren't this culturally omnipresent. Something about this particular historical moment has made cats central to how contemporary humans express themselves, connect with each other, and make meaning. Sociological analysis suggests cats' cultural dominance reflects contemporary anxieties and desires with uncanny precision. In an era of increasing social control, surveillance, and relentless demands for productivity, cats represent rebellion. They refuse to perform, they ignore commands, they prioritize their own comfort over external demands. They model autonomy in societies where autonomy feels increasingly impossible. Loneliness has become epidemic in developed nations, despite or because of constant digital connection. Traditional community structures have weakened, extended families scatter geographically, neighborhoods function as collections of strangers rather than social units. Religious institutions decline. People report having fewer close friends than previous generations. In this landscape, cats provide companionship without the high social demands of human relationships. They offer affection on their own terms, requiring neither constant interaction nor performance of emotional labor. Work-life balance deteriorates across developed economies. Productivity demands intensify. Rest becomes suspect. Leisure requires justification. Against this background, cats model behaviors many humans envy: sleeping 14 hours daily, refusing undesired interactions, prioritizing comfort and pleasure without guilt. They live as many humans wish they could, but feel unable to. We project our anxieties onto cats, our desires for freedom, our need for connection without control. They've become mirrors, showing us what we lack: autonomy, boundaries, the ability to say no. In worshipping cats, we're worshipping everything modern life denies us. Research confirms that cat content genuinely affects viewers' emotional states. Studies show that viewing cat videos and images reduces stress, increases positive emotions, and provides what researchers call emotional regulation through cute animal content. This isn't trivial. It represents cats serving genuine psychological functions in societies where traditional support structures have weakened. Cats have become emotional support animals in the broadest sense, not just for individuals with diagnosed conditions, but for entire cultures struggling with anxiety, isolation, and meaninglessness. They provide what sociologists call parasocial relationships, one-sided connections that nonetheless offer real emotional benefit. Different cultures assign different meanings to cats, revealing values and preoccupations. Japanese culture embraces kawaii aesthetics, with cats as ultimate symbols of cute culture: small, non-threatening, emotionally expressive. Middle Eastern appreciation of cats connects to Islamic tradition. Prophet Muhammad reportedly loved cats, and this influences contemporary attitudes. Western culture manifests tension: cats as beloved family members versus nuisance invasive species. Both perspectives coexisting and conflicting. Cats have become sites of cultural contestation. Debates about indoor versus outdoor keeping, about TNR programs, about whether cats are family members or property. These reflect deeper disagreements about human relationships with nature, wildness, and autonomy. Arguments about cats become arguments about how we want to live. Cultural critics, sociologists, and philosophers discuss what cats' cultural centrality signifies. Some argue cat obsession represents retreat from difficult human relationships into simpler connections with animals. Others counter that cats model healthy boundaries and self-respect that many humans would benefit from emulating. Both interpretations contain truth. Emerging cultural phenomena demonstrate cats' centrality. Cat cafes spread globally, spaces combining animal interaction with socializing, addressing both desire for cat contact and need for semi-public gathering spaces. Cat therapy programs operate in hospitals, nursing homes, schools. The professionalization of cat care accelerates professional cat sitters, cat behaviorists, feline, exclusive veterinary practices, all representing economic niches that didn't exist generations ago. These developments represent cats transitioning from peripheral to central in human lives, economically, emotionally, culturally. They're no longer just pets or working animals. They're cultural icons, economic forces, emotional infrastructure. Cats have become modern totems in the anthropological sense, animals through which societies think about themselves, their values, their relationships with nature, and autonomy. Ancient cultures used totems to organize social groups, express cosmologies, mediate relationships between human and natural worlds. Contemporary societies use cats similarly, though we rarely recognize or articulate this function. Whether cats remain culturally central or eventually become less prominent, they've already changed human civilization twice. First, through enabling agricultural societies to store grain and survive. Second, through adapting to human emotional needs in ways that make them indispensable companions. Understanding these changes helps us understand not just cats, but ourselves and our species' journey through history. 10,000 years ago, wildcats approached human grain stores and made a choice. They could have remained solitary hunters in the wilderness. They could have avoided human contact entirely, as most wild species did. Instead, they came close enough to exploit the ecological niche humans had created. But not so close, they surrendered their essential nature. They cooperated without submitting. They adapted without domesticating in the way humans domesticated everything else. How did creatures weighing less than 10 pounds reshape human history twice? The answer lies not in physical power, but in offering humans something we desperately need but struggle to create: relationships based on mutual choice rather than hierarchy and control. Every other domesticated animal bent to human will, through selective breeding that systematically suppressed wildness, independence, and self-determination. We chose the most docile wolves and bred them into dogs that looked to humans for leadership and approval. We turned fierce aurochs into placid cattle. We transformed wild boars into domestic pigs, wild sheep into flocks that followed without question, wild horses into beasts of burden. In each case, domestication meant breaking, removing the traits that made animals autonomous and replacing them with traits that made animals useful. Dogs became subordinate pack members, cattle, sheep, and pigs became living resources. Horses became transportation and labor. Each served human purposes by surrendering their own. But cats, through self-domestication, negotiated different terms: cooperation without submission, companionship without obedience, utility without exploitation. They killed rodents because hunting satisfied their instincts, not because humans commanded it. They lived near humans because it provided advantages, not because they had no choice. They maintained the option to leave, and that option, never exercised but always present, defined the relationship's character. This matters beyond cats specifically. It demonstrates that relationships don't require dominance hierarchies, that affection can exist without possession, that different species can cooperate without one controlling the other. These aren't just observations about animals, they're challenges to assumptions underlying how humans approach most relationships, both interspecies and intraspecies. Philosophers and ethicists discuss what cat-human relationships model: respect for otherness, acceptance of boundaries, appreciation of beings whose value isn't determined by service to human purposes. Cats don't exist to serve us, they exist for themselves. Any benefit we receive from their presence is byproduct of them living according to their own nature. This contrasts sharply with human approaches to most other animals, to nature generally, and often to other humans, where control, extraction, and subordination have been dominant paradigms. We take what we want. We reshape what we find to suit our purposes. We treat autonomy as obstacle rather than value. Every other animal we domesticated, we broke. We bred out their wildness until they became extensions of human will. Cats refused. They kept their claws, their independence, their otherness. And in doing so, they taught us something we desperately needed to learn: that love doesn't require control. Cats' refusal to be fully domesticated represents resistance that ultimately benefits both species. Cats maintain enough wildness to function independently if necessary. Humans gain relationships that don't replicate power dynamics experienced everywhere else. At work, in political structures, even in many human relationships. This plays out in everyday interactions. Cats don't come when called unless they want to. They don't perform tricks for treats. They grant or withhold affection based on their own preferences, their own moods, their own mysterious internal calculations. For humans accustomed to controlling relationships, this frustrates. We call them aloof, stubborn, ungrateful. But the documentary suggests it is also liberating. Cats remind us that love doesn't require power, that respecting another being's autonomy can be its own reward, that accepting a creature exactly as it is without trying to reshape it creates different kinds of intimacy than relationships built on control. Different people respond to this variably. Some, particularly those oriented toward control and predictability, prefer animals that submit and obey, dogs that eagerly comply, horses that accept riders, animals whose affection feels earned through dominance. Others, especially those who've experienced their own autonomy being violated, find cats' independence profoundly appealing. They recognize kindred spirits in creatures that refuse subordination. What cats taught humanity, through their first conquest as divine protectors and their second as beloved companions, is that coexistence doesn't require dominance, that the most meaningful relationships often involve accepting beings exactly as they are, rather than trying to reshape them into what we wish they'd be. 10,000 years ago, a farmer in the Fertile Crescent noticed wildcats hunting rodents near grain stores. Perhaps he left food scraps deliberately. Perhaps he simply didn't drive them away. A small choice made for practical reasons, solving an immediate problem. He couldn't have known this decision would shape plagues, extinctions, and the entire trajectory of human civilization. Cats and humans formed partnerships that solved immediate problems, rodent control in agricultural settlements, but created cascading effects neither species could have predicted. Cats spread across the ancient world because they were useful. Their ubiquity in medieval Europe meant their persecution contributed to conditions enabling the Black Death. Their post-plague recovery helped humanity survive. Their spread to every continent created ecological crises continuing today. The pattern reveals something fundamental about human intelligence and its limitations. We're smart enough to intervene dramatically in complex systems, but not always wise enough to predict or manage consequences. Ancient farmers solving rodent problems couldn't predict medieval plague dynamics. 3,000 years later, the ecological relationships connecting cats, rodents, and disease unfolded across timescales beyond individual human comprehension. Victorian pet enthusiasts breeding cats for beauty couldn't foresee island extinctions in the 20th century. Modern cat owners choosing outdoor access don't directly witness the billions of animals killed annually across landscapes they never see. This represents a characteristic human challenge. We perceive problems in our immediate environment and devise solutions using available resources. But complex systems operate on principles that defy simple cause and effect logic. Interventions produce ripple effects across spatial and temporal scales we struggle to comprehend. Feedback loops create outcomes nobody intended. What seemed beneficial locally becomes destructive globally. What worked short-term creates long-term problems. Cats exemplify this in multiple dimensions. Ecologically, introduced predators devastate naive prey through mechanisms that weren't predictable before ecology existed as science. Evolutionarily, human preferences shape cat genetics in ways that may not benefit cats themselves, breeding for appearance rather than health, selecting for traits that please humans rather than serve feline well-being. Culturally, our emotional attachments to cats conflict with conservation necessities, creating ethical dilemmas nobody foresaw when relationships began. Ecologists, historians, and systems thinkers discuss how to navigate this reality. We cannot undo past choices. Cats are globally distributed and won't disappear. We must manage present situations with imperfect information, making decisions whose consequences we can only partially predict. We should make future decisions with greater humility about our ability to control outcomes. This applies beyond cats. Many human interventions follow similar patterns, solving immediate problems while creating deferred consequences. Agriculture enabled civilization, but transformed ecosystems globally. Fossil fuels powered industrial development, but changed atmospheric chemistry. Antibiotics saved countless lives, but created resistant bacteria. Each seemed unambiguously beneficial initially. Each produced complications visible only later. Ancient humans invited cats into their granaries. They couldn't know this choice would shape plagues, extinctions, and the entire trajectory of human civilization. We're still making choices about cats, but now we can't claim ignorance about consequences. The question is whether we'll act on what we know. Addressing cat-related challenges requires thinking across timescales and perspectives. What benefits individual cats may harm wildlife populations. What seems compassionate immediately, feeding feral colonies, may worsen long-term problems by sustaining invasive predator populations at unnaturally high densities. What feels natural outdoor cat access may be historically anomalous and ecologically destructive. Recognizing consequences doesn't mean rejecting relationships with cats. It means taking responsibility for impacts and making informed trade-offs, rather than pretending choices are cost-free. Responsible management takes multiple forms. Supporting spay-neuter programs reduces population growth. Keeping owned cats indoors protects both cats and wildlife. Funding research on effective humane feral cat management develops better tools. Protecting especially vulnerable ecosystems from cat predation prevents irreversible losses. Accepting that perfect solutions often don't exist enables pragmatic progress. Communities attempt integrated approaches, combining TNR with aggressive adoption programs and strict abandonment enforcement reduces feral populations more effectively than any single intervention. Creating enclosed outdoor spaces provides enrichment without free roaming. Developing technologies, GPS collars revealing hunting patterns, cat bibs that reduce hunting success, offers tools that didn't exist previously. None of these solve everything, all involve trade-offs. But they represent attempts to manage relationships more thoughtfully than simply allowing dynamics to unfold without intervention or pretending problems don't exist. Cat's story is ultimately about human choices and responsibilities. We brought cats to every continent. We bred them into modern forms. We created conditions where they thrive or suffer. We bear responsibility for managing relationships we initiated, even when management proves difficult, expensive, or emotionally challenging. The lesson of consequences isn't that we shouldn't form relationships with other species or intervene in natural systems. That is impossible for creatures like humans whose very existence transforms environments. The lesson is that relationships between species, between humans and nature, between present actions and future consequences, are always more complex, consequential, and interconnected than they initially appear. We've traveled 10,000 years. We've examined archaeology, genetics, ecology, neuroscience, and cultural history. We've traced cats from African scrublands to Egyptian temples to medieval Europe to every inhabited continent. We've measured their impact on civilizations, ecosystems, and human psychology. We've assembled comprehensive understanding of cats' role in shaping human history. Yet individual cats remain inscrutable. Why do cats purr not only when content, but sometimes when injured or dying? The vibration frequency suggests self-soothing mechanisms, possibly promoting healing through bone stimulation. But we're speculating. We don't truly know what purring means to cats themselves, what subjective experience it represents, whether it is purely mechanical or deeply emotional. What exactly are they thinking when they stare fixedly at apparently empty spaces? We can invoke superior hearing detecting ultrasonic sounds, exceptional vision perceiving minute movements, sensitivity to air currents humans don't notice. But this explains mechanism, not experience. What does the world look like through their perception? What captures their attention in moments of intense focus? Why do some cats inexplicably dislike specific individuals while loving others? We propose theories, scent associations, voice frequencies, movement patterns triggering prey or threat responses. But cats' preferences often defy explanation. They choose favorites for reasons we cannot decode. Do cats experience emotions we recognize as love, or something alien to human understanding? When cats slow blink, purr in our presence, seek proximity, are these expressions of affection comparable to human feelings? Or are they something entirely different that we metaphorically translate through anthropomorphic frameworks? Researchers offer best answers which often amount to "we're not sure." This uncertainty is significant rather than just a gap awaiting closure. The mystery matters. Cats' inscrutability relates directly to their success with humans. We're attracted to puzzles, to complexity rewarding attention, to beings that don't immediately reveal themselves. Dogs' emotional transparency makes them easy to understand. They wear hearts on paws, displaying joy, guilt, devotion with unmistakable clarity. This creates deep bonds, but potentially less fascination across time. Cats' opacity creates interpretive space humans fill with meaning. We develop elaborate theories about our specific cat's preferences, personalities, and motivations. These theories may or may not align with reality, but they enrich relationships through the very act of wondering. The uncertainty generates engagement. Cat owners become amateur ethologists, noting patterns, testing hypotheses, constructing narratives explaining behavior. This one dislikes being picked up because of early trauma. That one prefers women because of voice pitch. Another seeks attention precisely at 3 a.m. because of ancestral crepuscular rhythms. Whether these explanations are accurate matters less than the relationship building they represent. Philosophical questions about animal consciousness emerge. Can we ever truly know another species' subjective experience? Thomas Nagel's famous essay, "What is it like to be a bat?" argues we cannot ask bat consciousness because their perceptual reality, echolocation, flight, nocturnal existence, differs fundamentally from ours. The same applies to cats, despite intimacy. We share physical space but may inhabit experiential universes as separate as different dimensions. Does it matter whether cats actually love us, if the relationship is meaningful regardless? Perhaps the question itself is wrong, asking whether cat affection matches human affection rather than accepting it as its own phenomenon, valuable on its own terms. Cats occupy unique positions, closer to humans than most species through millennia of cohabitation, yet still wild enough to remain partially other. This liminal status makes them perfect subjects for projection and meaning making. They're familiar enough to feel knowable, strange enough to remain mysterious. Different people interpret this variably. Some find it frustrating, preferring animals whose responses are predictable, whose needs are clear, whose affection is unambiguous. Others find it endlessly fascinating, appreciating relationships, maintaining elements of discovery and surprise even after decades. After 10,000 years, billions of interactions, and countless scientific studies, we still don't truly know what cats think, what they feel, or why they chose us. That mystery is not a failure of knowledge, it is the point. Some things are meant to remain unknowable. Some creatures are meant to be wondered at rather than understood. Cats knew this all along. Cats' continued mysteriousness after 10 millennia of intimacy should humble us about how much we truly understand about consciousness, emotion, and experience beyond our own species. We've decoded genomes, mapped neural pathways, catalogued behaviors. Yet the essential whatness of being a cat remains beyond our grasp. Perhaps this represents their greatest gift, reminding us that the world contains richness we don't and cannot fully comprehend. That understanding has limits, that some relationships thrive precisely because they resist complete knowledge. Return to those ancient paw prints in 9500-year-old clay, a small shape crossing wet sediment, preserved by accident, discovered millennia later. Across those millennia, cats left traces everywhere, in archaeology, in genetics, in ecosystems, in culture, and in human hearts. But they never fully revealed themselves. They walked into human settlements on their own terms. They stayed on their own terms. They remained fundamentally on their own terms. Right now, as you finish this, approximately 600 million domestic cats live alongside humans worldwide. Each one is a tiny mystery, a small predator, a creature both ancient and modern, both wild and domestic, both knowable and unknowable. They sleeping on couches, hunting in gardens, purring in laps, staring at nothing, existing in worlds we can only partially imagine. They conquered humanity not through force but through fascination. The conquest continues, one mysterious, magnificent creature at a time.